Come in out of the wet, friend. Fire's going, chairs empty, kettle's warm. Do me a kindness and subscribe, then tell me down in the comments where you're listening from and what the clock says there. I read everyone. Now settle in. Here we go. Story 1. This story sat in my journal for 40 years before I understood it, and even now, I'm not sure I do. It concerns a man named Elwood Barnes Prescott, a piano tuner out of Asheville, North Carolina, who took a job in October of 1958 at a house up in the Blue Ridge that had no business owning a piano at all. Now listen close. This is how it happened, best as I can tell it, and the parts I can't tell you. Well, those are the parts that mattered most. Elwood was 51 years old that autumn, a widower. His wife Marion had passed in the spring of 55, and he'd been living alone in a narrow brick row house on Chestnut Street ever since, tuning pianos for the churches and the little music schools and the occasional wealthy family up in Biltmore Forest. He had a slow, careful way about him, the kind of man who wound his pocket watch every morning at 6:15 and ate the same breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee and one soft-boiled egg every single day of the week. He drove a 1949 Ford pickup, blue as a robin's egg once, faded now to the color of an old work shirt. His tools rode in a wooden case behind the seat. Tuning hammer, felt strips, temperament strip, mutes, a little brass tuning fork he'd inherited from his father. He'd been in the trade 31 years by that October, and he could hear a note going flat before it finished ringing. The letter came on a Tuesday. Cream envelope, no return address, postmarked from a town called Little Fork, up near the Tennessee line. Elwood didn't know the town. He looked it up later in his road atlas and found it printed so small he needed his reading glasses to be sure it was there at all. Population, according to the atlas, was 142. The letter was written in a woman's hand. Careful, slanted, the letters pressed a little too hard into the paper. It said her name was Miss Iona Wexler, and she had inherited her grandfather's house, and there was a piano in the parlor that had not been tuned since 1921, and she was told Mr. Prescott was the best in the region. She would pay him double his rate. She would provide lodging for the night. She would send a hand-drawn map because the roads up her way weren't on most maps. Elwood read the letter twice. He folded it. He unfolded it. He read it again. Then he wrote her back and said he would come on the 23rd. The morning of the 23rd came in gray and damp. Not raining outright, but the kind of low sky that promises it later. He loaded his tool case into the truck. He ate his oatmeal. He wound his watch. He locked his front door and drove north on the old highway with the map spread on the seat beside him and his reading glasses in his shirt pocket. The drive took most of the day. Little Fork was 3 hours and change from Asheville, and then the hand-drawn map took him another 40 minutes off the paved road, up a switchback dirt track that climbed through hemlock and rhododendron and old-growth chestnut stumps. He passed no cars. He passed no houses. He passed a mailbox once, leaning sideways with no name on it and no road going up to anywhere he could see. The house sat in a clearing at the top of the ridge. 2 stories, white clapboard gone gray, a tin roof rusted to the color of dried blood, wrap-around porch sagging on the north side, a single stone chimney puffing pale smoke that didn't seem to rise so much as drift sideways and dissolve. Miss Iona Wexler met him at the door before he'd fully stopped the truck. She was maybe 40, maybe 50. It was hard to tell. Her hair was pulled back so tight it made her eyes look surprised, and she wore a long gray dress with a white apron over it, and her hands were folded in front of her the way a schoolmarm's hands fold when she's about to ask you a question you won't know the answer to. She said, "Mr. Prescott, you are punctual. Please come in." He came in. The house smelled of damp wood and mothballs and something else he couldn't place. Something like coffee grounds gone stale in a jar. The entry hall was narrow and dim, wallpapered in a pattern of small brown roses that had faded almost to nothing. A grandfather clock stood against the far wall, tall as a man, its brass pendulum swinging slow. Its face read 3 minutes past 4. He glanced at his own pocket watch. His watch also read 3 minutes past 4. That was the last time they agreed. She led him through the entry into the parlor, and there, in the corner beneath a tall window curtained with lace so old it had gone the color of weak tea, sat the piano, an upright, rosewood case, ivory keys, yellowed the way old teeth yellow. He'd have guessed it was made around 1890, maybe a Chickering, maybe a Steinway square. He walked to it slow. He touched the case. Cold, colder than the room around it. Miss Wexler said, "I'll bring you tea." Then she left him alone. Elwood set down his tool case. He opened it. He took out his tuning hammer and his felt strips and his little brass fork. He lifted the lid on the piano and looked inside. The strings were intact. That surprised him. In a piano that had sat 37 years unattended, he'd expected corrosion, mouse damage, at least one broken string. There was dust, yes, a fine gray dust over everything, but the strings were whole, and the hammers were whole, and the felts were only lightly worn, and when he pressed middle C, the note rang out clear and only about a quarter step flat. He said to himself, well now. He set to work. Now here is where the small things began, and I want you to pay attention to them, because Elwood didn't, not at first. He was a man who trusted his tools and his ears and the ordinariness of the world. The first small thing was this. When he pressed the pedal to sustain a note, he heard the pedal click. And then, a beat later, he heard it click again, softly, from somewhere else in the house. He stopped. He listened. Nothing. He pressed the pedal a second time. One click. He pressed it a third time. One click. And then, from somewhere below him, a second click. Fainter. Like an echo that had traveled too far, he told himself the house was old. Old houses settle. Old houses answer themselves. The second small thing was the tea. Miss Wexler brought it on a small silver tray. 2 cups, one for him, one for her, though she did not sit and did not drink. She set the tray on a marble-top table and stood by the window with her hands folded and watched him work. The tea was black and bitter and tasted faintly of iron. Elwood drank it because he was raised to drink what was offered. When he set the cup down, the saucer was dry. There had been no drips. There had been no spill. But the cup was empty, and he did not remember finishing it. He worked on. The third small thing was the light. The parlor had one window, curtained in lace, facing west. When he began at 4 o'clock, the light through the lace was gray and even. By what should have been 5 o'clock, the light had not changed. He glanced at his pocket watch. 4:03. He shook his watch. He held it to his ear. It was ticking. He glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall. He couldn't see it from where he sat, but he could hear its pendulum. And the pendulum, he realized, was swinging slower than it should, not stopped, just slower. He told himself he was tired from the drive. The fourth small thing was the note, not a musical note, a written one. He found it folded and tucked between the second and third strings of A above middle C. Paper the color of weak tea, the same color as the lace curtains, folded into a small triangle. He drew it out carefully. He unfolded it. The handwriting was the same slanting, careful hand as Miss Wexler's letter, but smaller. It said, "In full, he is under the boards. He has been under the boards a long time. Do not stop tuning." Elwood read it twice. He folded it. He put it in his shirt pocket, behind his reading glasses. He did not stop tuning. He told himself later that he did not know why he didn't stop, that it seemed in the moment like the reasonable thing. The letter was old, he thought. The letter was a prank, he thought. The letter was left by some child, some visitor, some previous tuner playing a joke, though he couldn't imagine what tuner would have been up here before him, given that the piano hadn't been tuned since 1921. The fifth small thing was Miss Wexler herself. She had not moved, not in the way that a person stands still, in the way that a photograph stands still. Her hands were folded exactly as they had been folded when she set down the tea. Her head was tilted at exactly the same angle. Her breath, if she was breathing, did not lift the front of her apron. He watched her out of the corner of his eye for a full minute by his own watch, and she did not shift her weight, did not blink that he saw, did not swallow. He looked away. He kept tuning. When he looked back, she had moved. She was now standing on the other side of the window, same posture, same fold of the hands, but 2 feet to the left. He had not heard her step. The sixth small thing, and this is the one that finally made him set down his tuning hammer, was the sound beneath the floor. He had been working perhaps 2 hours by then, though the light through the lace had still not changed. He was in the middle temperament, setting the octave from F below middle C to F above, when he pressed the pedal to sustain, and beneath the pedal click, beneath the fading tone of the note, he heard something else. He heard a breath, not his own. His own breath he could account for. This one came from beneath him, from beneath the parlor floor, a slow-drawn breath in, and then, after a pause too long to be comfortable, a slow breath out. He froze. He listened. It came again, in, out, deep, patient, the way a sleeping man breathes, but wetter, like there was something in the throat. He looked at Miss Wexler. She was watching him now, not the piano, him. Her eyes were the color of the tea, and her mouth was very slightly open, and she said, in a voice that seemed to come from farther away than she was standing, "Please do not stop, Mr. Prescott. Please continue." He continued. He tells himself, in the journal I read 40 years later, that he continued because he was afraid. That is the reason he wrote down. But I have read that journal 100 times, and I don't think fear is the whole of it. I think there was something in the sound of that breath that told him if he stopped, something worse than fear would happen. Not to him, to her. He tuned for another hour. The light did not change. The clock in the hall grew slower. The breath beneath the floor kept its rhythm. In, pause, out, pause, in. And then he began to notice a rhythm in his own tuning, that the breath beneath the floor came in on the same beat as his pedal press, went out on the same beat as his release, as if whatever was down there was breathing in time with the piano, as if he was, without meaning to, playing it. He set down the tuning hammer. He said, "Miss Wexler, ma'am." "There is something under this floor?" She did not move. She said, "Yes." He said, "What is it?" She said, "He is my grandfather." He said, "Your grandfather?" She said, "He came home from the war in 1920. He was not the man who left. He would not speak. He would not sleep in a bed. He built himself a place beneath the parlor floor, and he lay down in it, and he has lain in it since." The piano was tuned once in 1921, and he slept while it was tuned. That was the only time he slept. My mother tried to have him removed. 3 men came with a coffin. When they lifted the boards, they found him breathing. They put the boards back down. My mother tuned the piano herself, though she could not tune. She only pressed the keys. He slept for 1 week. Then he began again. She died in 1942. I have kept him since. Elwood looked at the piano. He looked at the boards beneath his feet. The parlor floor was wide plank pine, dark with age, worn smooth in a path from the door to the piano. Directly beneath the piano bench, he now saw, was a slightly darker rectangle, a patch of boards a shade different from the rest, perhaps 3 feet by 6. He said, "How long since he has slept?" She said, 37 years. He said, "And he has been breathing that long." She said, "He has been waiting that long." He said, "Waiting for what?" She said, "For someone to finish the tuning." Now, here is where the descent began, and the descent in Elwood's story was not a descent into any basement or attic. The descent was into the piano itself. Because he understood then, or thought he did, that the tuning was not being done for the piano, the tuning was being done for whatever lay beneath the floor, that his hammer, his felts, his little brass fork were not instruments for a piano at all. They were instruments for a right. He asked her, very quiet, "What happens when the tuning is finished?" She said, "He sleeps. He sleeps at last." He said, "And then?" She said, "And then he does not wake." He said, "And you?" She said, "I have waited a long time, Mr. Prescott. I am tired." He picked up the tuning hammer. His hands were shaking now, and he was ashamed of that, because a piano tuner's hands must be steady. But the room was cold, and the light through the lace had still not changed, and the breath beneath the boards was coming a little faster now, as if it knew. He set the hammer to the tuning pin. He turned the pin. The note rose. The breath rose with it. He turned it again. The note found its pitch. The breath drew in further, held longer, until Elwood thought the lungs beneath the floor must burst. Then the breath let out, and with it went a sound. Not a word exactly, a shape of a word. Something like yes, something like home, something like Marion. He froze. Marion, that was his wife's name. His wife who had been dead 3 years. He looked at Miss Wexler. She was smiling now, a small, tired smile. She said, "He has been waiting for you, Mr. Prescott. He has been waiting a long time." He said, "But I never knew him. I never knew any of you." She said, "He knew you. He has been calling you. He has been calling you every night since 1921. Your father heard him first. Your father was the tuner before you. Your father came here in 1921 and could not finish. Your father went home and drank himself to death and never told anyone. Your father passed the calling to you, and he passed the tools to you. The little brass fork, Mr. Prescott. Look at your fork." Elwood looked at the tuning fork in his palm. His father's fork. His father, who had died in 1932, drunk in a rooming house in Knoxville, with no explanation any of them could ever pry out of the family. On the base of the brass fork, engraved so small he had never noticed it, was a date. October 23rd, 1921. The same date as today, 37 years ago. He said, "No?" She said, "Please continue, Mr. Prescott. He is almost asleep." He continued. He tuned the last octave. He tuned the highest strings, thin as spider silk, ringing bright. He tuned the lowest, thick as pencils, growling deep. The breath beneath the boards slowed and slowed and slowed, until between each in-breath there was a silence long enough to hold a whole song. And then, when he set the last pin and lifted the last mute and played a slow C major chord from bottom to top, the breath stopped altogether. The house was silent. The grandfather clock in the hall was silent. Miss Wexler was silent. Elwood stood up from the piano bench. His knees cracked. He turned to speak to Miss Wexler, but she was no longer standing by the window. She was standing in front of him, 2 feet away. Same posture, same fold of the hands, but her face was different now, younger, softer. He knew that face. He had known it 31 years. It was Marion's face, his wife's face, the face he had buried in a wooden box in the spring of 1955. She said in Marion's voice, "You did well, Elwood. You did so well. Come lie down now. It's your turn." He looked at the piano. He looked at the boards beneath the piano bench, the darker rectangle of pine, and he saw now that the boards had been lifted, that the darker rectangle was open, that beneath it was a hollow lined in old blankets, a space just his size. He looked at his pocket watch. It read 4:03. He looked at the clock in the hall. It read 4:03. He looked at the light through the lace curtain. Still gray, still even, still 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 23rd of October, 1958. And he understood finally what he had been tuning. He wrote in the journal that he does not remember lying down. He does not remember pulling the boards over himself. He does not remember Miss Wexler or Marion or whoever she had been closing them above him. He only remembers that the last thing he heard before the dark closed in was the sound of the piano being tuned, slow, careful, a hammer turning a pin, a felt strip laid between strings, a little brass fork ringing pure A, and a man's footsteps above him, walking to the piano bench, sitting down, whistling faintly, beginning. The journal ends there. It was found in the glove box of a 1949 Ford pickup parked at the bottom of a switchback dirt road in the Blue Ridge in the spring of 1959. The truck was empty. The tools were gone. The road, when investigators tried to follow it, did not go up to any house at all. Just kept climbing until it stopped in a clearing full of hemlock and old chestnut stumps and a single stone chimney standing alone in the grass. No house around it, just the chimney, still warm. Story 2. A woman told me this in Charleston when I was still working the mail route, and she made me promise I wouldn't tell it for 20 years, and I have kept that promise, and then some. Her name I'll keep to myself. But the man in the story was called Hollis Vernon Trask, and he was a ferry operator on a little crossing in the Georgia Low Country, and what happened to him happened in the summer of 1938. When the whole country was still poor and the marsh was still full of things nobody had names for. Now listen close. This is how she told it to me and how I remember it. And if the parts don't quite fit, well, that's the marsh for you. The marsh never fits. Hollis Trask was 44 years old that summer, a widower, though not by grief. His wife Delia had walked out on him in 1931 and gone up to Savannah with a man who sold sewing machines, and Hollis had not heard from her since and did not particularly wish to. He lived alone in a small tabby shell house on the west bank of a tidal creek called Two Sisters, in a stretch of Georgia low country so flat and so wet that at high tide half his front yard was under an inch of black water and half a dozen fiddler crabs. He ran the ferry. It was not much of a ferry, a flat pine barge 24 feet by 12 with a wooden railing on 3 sides and a hand-cranked cable strung between 2 cedar posts, one on each bank of the creek. The creek was maybe 60 feet across at the crossing. The bottom was pluff mud, 6 or 7 feet deep of it, and beneath that, nobody knew and nobody cared to find out. Hollis pulled the barge across by hand, one crank at a time, 42 turns of the wheel from the west bank to the east. 42. He had counted them every crossing for 11 years. 42 turns going east. 42 turns coming back west. He knew that number the way a man knows the number of steps from his bed to his coffee pot. His customers were few. A rice farmer named McQuaid, who lived on the east side and came across on Saturdays for supplies. A colored midwife named Miss Ruth, who crossed at odd hours whenever a baby was coming. A traveling preacher who came through twice a year and always paid in dimes. And now and again a stranger who had wandered off the county road and needed to get to the other side for reasons Hollis did not ask about. The barge was tied to the west bank when the strangers came. It was almost always tied to the west bank because Hollis lived on the west, and the east side of the creek had only the little dirt road that led back through the marsh and eventually, some 10 miles on, joined up with the state road to Brunswick. The evening of the 17th of July, 1938, was hot, the way only low-country evenings can be hot. The kind of heat that sits on your chest and drinks your sweat. The tide was low. The mud along the banks was black and shining, and the fiddler crabs were out by the thousands, all with their one big claw raised the same direction like a little army waiting for orders. Hollis was sitting on his front porch. He had a cup of coffee gone cold on the railing beside him. He was mending a rip in his ferry cable glove with a piece of waxed thread. The sun was down behind the pines on the west side, and the sky over the marsh was that color you only see in the low country in July. Not orange, not pink, something greener, something closer to the color the water gets when the tide turns. He heard the bell before he saw the man. There was a small brass bell hung from a post on the east bank. If someone wanted the ferry, they rang the bell, and Hollis crossed to fetch them. The bell had a particular sound, high and thin, a little cracked, because it had been made from an old locomotive bell that had been in a fire. It rang once, then again, then a third time, slow, patient, the way a man who knows the ferryman will come rings the bell. Hollis set down his glove. He put on his hat. He walked down to the crossing. The barge was tied where he'd left it. He untied the rope and stepped aboard and took hold of the crank. He turned the wheel. 1, 2, 3. The cable creaked. The barge slid out into the black water, and the fiddler crabs on the west bank all lowered their claws at once, and the fiddler crabs on the east bank all raised theirs. He counted, as he always counted, 10, 11, 12. At 21 turns, halfway, he looked up to see who had rung the bell. There was no one on the east bank. The bell was still swinging. Hollis stopped cranking. He stood on the barge in the middle of the creek and watched the bell swing. It swung 6 more times before it stilled. He waited. He listened. The marsh made its sounds. The clatter of crabs, the plop of a mullet in the shallows, the far-off croak of a night heron. But no footsteps, no voice, no man. He told himself the bell had been rung by a child, some rice farm kid playing a joke. He told himself the child was hiding in the pluff and would show himself soon. He waited 5 minutes by his pocket watch. 10, 15. Then he cranked the barge the rest of the way to the east bank. 22, 23, 24. He counted them. He got to 42. The barge did not touch the east bank. He counted 3 more. 43, 44, 45. The cable creaked. The barge slid, but the east bank did not come closer. He could see it clear as anything 20 feet ahead. The cedar post, the brass bell still now, the little worn place in the grass where he stepped off 100 times a year. But the barge did not reach it. He kept cranking. 50, 60, 70. His arms began to ache. 75, 80. His shirt was soaked through. At 100 turns, he stopped. The east bank was exactly the same distance away. He looked back over his shoulder. The west bank was exactly the same distance behind him. He was in the middle of the creek. The middle of the creek where he had always been, where he had cranked past 1,000 times, and the barge had stopped moving forward, and it had also stopped moving back. He tried cranking the other way. He turned the wheel backwards. The cable creaked in the other direction. The barge did not move. He stood a long time on that barge in the middle of that creek and watched the light go out of the sky. Now, here's where the small things began. And the marsh, being what it is, gave them slowly. The first small thing was the tide. Hollis had lived on that creek 11 years. He knew its tides the way he knew his own pulse. The tide had been low when he stepped onto the barge. It should have been rising. He watched the mud on the east bank. He watched the mark on the cedar post where the water always reached at high tide. The mark was still 6 inches above the water, and it stayed 6 inches above the water. The tide was not rising. The tide was not falling. The tide was simply where it was. He watched for an hour by his watch. The mark stayed. The water stayed. The fiddler crabs on both banks stayed in their positions, claws raised or lowered, and did not move. The second small thing was the bell. It rang again. Not a hand ringing it. There was no hand. It rang the way it had rung before, 3 slow, patient rings from the empty east bank, with nothing beside it but a cedar post and a stretch of black mud. Hollis called out. He said, "Hello?" He said, "Anybody there?" The bell answered him. 3 more rings. He said, "I can't cross. Something's wrong with the cable. Ring again if you hear me." The bell rang once. He said, "Are you still there?" The bell rang once. He said, "Are you a man?" Silence. He said, "Are you a child?" Silence. He said, "What are you?" The bell rang. Not 3 times. Not once. It rang a long, continuous ring, the way a bell rings when someone is holding the clapper and shaking it. It rang for a full minute. Then it stopped. Hollis sat down on the deck of the barge. The third small thing was the sound behind him. Somewhere back on the west bank, in his own yard, in his own house, a door closed, not slammed, closed, firmly, the way a man closes the door when he has come home for the evening. Hollis turned around. He looked at his house. The porch was empty. The coffee cup was still on the railing where he had left it. The lamp in the front room, which he had not lit, was now lit. warm yellow light behind the glass. He said out loud, to no one in particular, "That's my house." The lamp went out. Then it came back on, then it went out again. The fourth small thing was the smell. It came up from the water beside the barge, not the ordinary smell of Pluff mud, which is a smell Hollis had lived with his whole life, and which is not unpleasant if you were raised to it. Sulfur and salt and rotting vegetation, that's Pluff mud. This was different. This was something underneath the Pluff, something the Pluff had been keeping down. It smelled like iron. It smelled like wet wool. It smelled like the inside of a room that has been closed too long. He looked over the railing. The water was black, not just dark. Black the way ink is black, so that the reflections did not show right. He could see the sky above him reflected in the water, but the sky in the water was a different sky. The clouds in the water were arranged differently. And there were in the water 3 points of light, where there should not have been 3 points of light, because there were no stars yet in the sky above, and no boats on the creek, and no lamps on either bank besides the one in his house, which had just gone out again. 3 points of light, yellow, close together, under the water, close to the barge, rising. The fifth small thing, and this was the one that broke him a little, was the voice. It came from the east bank, from beside the cedar post, from where the man who had rung the bell should have been standing. It said, Hollis. Just that. His first name, in a voice he knew. It was Delia's voice. His wife Delia, who had left him 7 years ago and gone up to Savannah with the sewing machine man. His wife, whose voice he had not heard since the morning she walked out with a cardboard suitcase and did not look back. The voice said, Hollis, come across. Come across, Hollis. I've been waiting. He said, Delia. The voice said, come across. He said, I can't. Something's wrong with the barge. The voice said, then walk. He said, I can't walk. It's 6 feet of pluff. There's no bottom. The voice said, there is a bottom, Hollis. There has always been a bottom. You just never looked for it. Then the voice was quiet, and the 3 points of light under the water were still rising, and the smell was worse now, and he could hear, somewhere in the black water, a sound like something large turning over in its sleep. Hollis Trask was not a brave man. He would have told you that himself. He was a ferry operator on a creek nobody crossed. He counted turns of a wheel for a living. He had never been in a fight, never fired a gun in anger, never done anything in his life that anyone would call bold. But he was, when it came down to it, a stubborn man. And stubbornness in the marsh is a kind of bravery. He stood up. He walked to the west side of the barge. He took hold of the cable with both hands, and he began to pull, not crank the wheel, pull the cable itself, hand over hand, dragging the barge back toward the west bank by main strength. The cable was slick. The cable was heavy. The cable creaked in a way it should not have creaked, because a cable that has been strung for years does not creak, and this one creaked as if it were being stretched. He pulled, he counted, not turns of a wheel this time, pulls. 10, 20, 30. The west bank did not come closer. He pulled harder. 40, 50. At 60 pulls, the cable went slack, not broke, slack, as if the far end of it had come loose. He held it in his hands. It hung limp. He looked toward the west bank. The cedar post on his side of the creek was still there. The cable was still tied to it. He could see the knot, but the cable in his hands was slack. He pulled it in. It came in easy, hand over hand, wet and cold. He pulled in 10 feet, 20 feet, 30. The cable kept coming. He pulled in 50 feet of cable, and the creek was only 60 feet across, and the cable kept coming. At 100 feet, he stopped. He was standing on the deck of the barge in a coil of wet black cable up to his knees. He looked at the cedar post on the west bank. The cable was still tied to it, taut, not slack. The cable in his hands was a different cable. He dropped it. It fell into the black water and did not sink. It floated for a moment, coiled like a snake, and then it slid, slow and deliberate, over the far side of the barge and down into the water on the east side of the boat. The 3 points of light under the water were very close now. They were not lights. They were eyes. He backed away from the railing. He backed all the way to the west side of the barge. He sat down on the deck with his back against the wooden railing, and he put his face in his hands, and he tried to think. He thought about Delia. He thought about the sewing machine man. He thought about the day she left, the smell of her hair as she walked past him in the doorway, the exact words she said. She had said, "I don't hate you, Hollis. I just cannot live in this marsh one more day." He thought about how 3 months after she left, a letter had come from a woman in Savannah, a woman who said she was Delia's landlady. The letter had said that Delia had never arrived, that the sewing machine man had shown up alone, drunk, wild-eyed, saying she had jumped from the car somewhere south of Darien and run off into the marsh, that there had been a search, that the search had found nothing, not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not a body. He had never told anyone about that letter. He had burned it in the wood stove the same night it came, and he had never spoken Delia's name again. And he had continued to run the ferry, 42 cranks east, 42 cranks west, for 7 more years. He thought about all of that, sitting on the deck of the barge, and then he heard from the east bank Delia's voice again. She said, "Hollis." He said, "Yes." She said, "Do you know how long I've been waiting?" He said, "No." She said, 7 years, Hollis. 7 years in the mud. 7 years counting the times you cranked the wheel. 42 east, 42 west. 84 a day most days. Do you know how many days? He said, "No." She said, 2,555 days, Hollis. 214,620 cranks to that wheel. Every one of them I heard. Every one of them I counted with you. I was under your barge, Hollis. Every crossing, I was right beneath your feet. He said, "Delia," she said, "he didn't take me to Savannah, Hollis. He put me in the water south of the ferry road, right where the creek meets the sound, and the tide brought me up, and the tide brought me here. And I have been here ever since, in the pluff, under your boat." He said, "I'm sorry." She said, "I know you are." She said, "Come down, Hollis. Come down and see me. There's a bottom. I promise there's a bottom. It's not so far." He looked over the railing. The 3 eyes were at the surface now. They were not Delia's eyes. They were the eyes of something else, something that had been in the mud a very long time, something that had learned Delia's voice the way a mockingbird learns a song, not because it wanted to be Delia, because Delia had been down there with it for 7 years, and it had listened. It had listened to her calling him every day, every crank of the wheel. It had listened, and it had learned. Hollis understood then that Delia had been dead a long time, truly dead. Not the way this thing was dead. The mud had taken her. She was gone. What was calling him now in her voice was something older, something that had been in that creek before there was a ferry, before there was a Georgia, before there were people who counted things in turns of a wheel. And it was hungry, and it had been waiting, and it had learned patience from the woman who had waited 7 years to be found. Hollis stood up. He was very calm now, the way a man gets calm when he understands finally what is happening to him. He walked to the west side of the barge. He looked at the west bank, his house, his porch, the coffee cup on the railing, the lamp in the window, lit again now, warm and yellow. There was someone on the porch, a man sitting in Hollis's chair, wearing Hollis's hat, mending a rip in a ferry cable glove with a piece of waxed thread. The man on the porch looked up. He looked across the creek. He looked at Hollis on the barge, and he raised his hand. A small wave. Friendly. Hollis raised his own hand. The man on the porch went back to his mending. Hollis understood then, too. He understood the whole shape of it. He walked to the east side of the barge. He looked at the water. The three eyes were watching him, patient, waiting. The voice from the east bank said, "Come down, Hollis. It's not so far. There's a bottom, I promise." He stepped up onto the railing. He said out loud to whoever might be listening, 42 east, 42 west. That's all it ever was. He stepped off. Now, here is what the woman in Charleston told me, and here is where the story turned from a story about a man to a story about a place. The ferry was found in the morning by the rice farmer, McQuaid. It was tied to the west bank. Same as always. The cable was tight between its two cedar posts. The bell on the east bank was still. Hollis's coffee cup was on the porch railing. His glove was mended and folded on the chair. His pocket watch was on the kitchen table, wound, ticking, reading 8:43 in the morning, which was the correct time. Hollis Trask was gone. No one thought much of it at first. Men disappeared out of the marsh sometimes. The tide takes them. The pluff takes them. It's an old story down there, and nobody makes a fuss. But 3 days later, McQuaid came back to cross. He rang the bell on the east bank. The ferry came across. 42 cranks, same as always. A man was cranking it, wearing Hollis's hat, wearing Hollis's boots, mending a rip in Hollis's glove between crossings. McQuaid said, "Hollis, you're back." The man said, "I've been here all along." McQuaid looked at him a long time, and McQuaid was not a stupid man. He said later to the woman in Charleston, who was his niece, that the man on the barge had Hollis's face and Hollis's voice and Hollis's hands, but that the eyes were wrong, not the color. The color was Hollis's gray blue, but there was something behind the eyes that had not been behind Hollis's eyes before, something patient, something that had learned. McQuaid paid his dime. He crossed the creek. He did not use that ferry again. He walked 10 miles around by the state road every Saturday for the rest of his life. The ferry ran for another 30 years. The man who ran it never aged. He mended his glove. He wound his watch. He cranked the wheel. 42 east, 42 west. The county finally shut the crossing down in 1968 when they put in the bridge 2 miles upstream. The barge was pulled out of the water. The cable was cut. The cedar posts were left standing, one on each bank, because nobody wanted to go into the pluff to pull them. They are still there, the woman said. She had seen them once from a boat in 1972. 2 cedar posts, one on each side of a creek nobody crosses, a little brass bell still hanging from the east post, though the rope has long since rotted. And at high tide sometimes, if the light is right, you can see a shape under the water moving slow between the 2 posts, back and forth, back and forth, 42 cranks each way. Story 3. I lived this one myself, or I think I did. My memory isn't what it was, and there are parts of this that don't fit together the way parts of a memory should fit, and I've stopped trying to make them fit. I'll tell it to you the way it comes to me, and you can decide for yourself what it was. This was in the autumn of 1971. I was 34 years old, and I was working as a land surveyor for a small firm out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. We did property lines mostly, boundary disputes between farms, occasional work for the county highway department when they were widening a road, occasional work for lawyers when an estate had to be split between children who couldn't agree on which fence belonged to whom. The job I want to tell you about came in through a lawyer named Ambrose Coldwell. Coldwell was an old man even then, 70-something, with a face like a walnut and a voice like a slow-moving creek. He had an office above the drugstore on the town square, and he did probate work, mostly wills and estates, and the slow, careful business of dividing what the dead had left behind. He called me on a Tuesday morning in October. He said, "Son, I've got a peculiar one for you. Old woman up in Butler County passed in the spring. No children, no living kin that we found. She left a house and about 90 acres of hill country, and the county wants a proper survey before we auction it off. Nobody's been out there in years. Roads are bad. Could you go take a look?" I said I could. He said one more thing. The old woman left a set of instructions with her will. She was particular about the house. She said the surveyor was to enter through the front door, walk the ground floor before going upstairs, and not to open the door on the second floor at the end of the north hallway, not for any reason. I said, "Ambrose, are you serious?" He said, "I am reporting to you what she wrote. I make no representation as to the woman's state of mind. She was 91 when she died, but those were her instructions, and if you'd humor an old lawyer, I'd appreciate you humoring an older client." I said I would. He said, "Good. Keys are in my office. Come by tomorrow." Now, I want to be honest with you. I was not spooked by that phone call. Not then. I had been in this business 12 years, and I had walked through more empty houses than I could count. Old people are strange about their houses. They leave notes on the refrigerator that say, "Do not move the blue chair." They leave instructions with their lawyers about which rose bushes to water. It's a way of holding on to a thing after you're gone. I had learned to respect it and not to think much of it. I drove up to Butler County the next morning. It was a 2-hour drive, mostly on county blacktop, and then 20 minutes on gravel, and then 10 minutes on what my transit book called an unimproved road, but which I would have called a rough suggestion of a road. Ruts a foot deep in places, overhanging branches that scraped the roof of my truck. The kind of road you don't take fast and you don't take twice if you can help it. The house sat at the end of the road. It was 2 stories, white clapboard, black shutters, a wide front porch with 2 rocking chairs still on it. The paint was old, but not peeling. The porch boards were solid. The yard had gone to seed, but the grass was not so tall that the house looked abandoned. It looked, more than anything, like a house whose owner had gone into town for the afternoon and just not come back yet. I sat in the truck and looked at it for a minute before I got out. There's a thing you do in this work when you come up on a property. You look at it, you listen to it, you get a sense of it before you set foot on it. And this house sat wrong on the land. I couldn't have told you why. The proportions were fine. The setting was fine. The angle of the roof to the ridge behind it was fine, but it sat there like a photograph that had been printed slightly out of register, everything in the right place, and yet nothing quite lined up. I got my equipment out of the truck, my transit, my tripod, my rod and chain, my field book, and my pencils, and my little brass compass on the leather cord around my neck. I set them on the porch, and I unlocked the front door with the key Ambrose Coldwell had given me. The door opened easy. No stick, no groan. It swung inward on hinges that had been recently oiled. That was the first small thing. An abandoned house does not have oiled hinges. I stepped inside. The entry hall was narrow. Dark wood floor, wide plank, waxed and polished. A staircase rose on the right-hand side to a landing. On the left was a doorway into a front parlor, and past that another doorway into what I could see was a dining room. Straight ahead, the hall ran back to a kitchen. Everything was clean. Not clean the way a museum is clean, with the dust hidden in glass cases. Clean the way a house is clean when someone has been keeping it clean. I remembered Coldwell's instructions. Walk the ground floor first. Don't open the north hallway door upstairs. I did as I was told. The front parlor had a horsehair sofa, a small piano I did not touch, a coffee table with a lace runner, and a bookshelf full of theology and almanacs, and one very old Bible on a stand. The dining room had a table set for four. 4 plates, 4 cups, 4 napkins folded and tucked through silver rings, as if the woman had been expecting company. The company had not come. The dust on the plates was very fine, but the dust was there, and I looked at it with my pocket flashlight, and I saw that the dust was even, undisturbed, laid down in the way dust lays down over months and not years. The kitchen had a wood stove, cold, a sink with a hand pump, a tin coffee pot on the drain board, empty but recently rinsed, a calendar on the wall that read April 1971. The old woman had died in April. That fit. I went back to the entry hall. I set my field book on a small side table, and I began to sketch the ground floor plan. This is the boring part of the work, and I liked it. It settles the mind. You measure a wall, you write it down. You count doors, you write it down. You do this until the shape of a building is on your page in pencil lines, and then you know the building the way you know a poem you have memorized. I sketched the parlor, I sketched the dining room, I sketched the kitchen, I sketched the small pantry off the kitchen, I sketched the little back porch off the pantry, I sketched the staircase up. The problem started when I added the walls together. The exterior of the house, as I had seen it from the truck, measured about 40 feet along the front. I had estimated that with my eye, which is not a bad instrument after 12 years of practice. When I added up the rooms on my sketch, I got 32 feet. 8 feet were missing. I thought at first that I had measured wrong. I went back through my sketch. I measured the parlor again with my tape, 15 feet by 14. I measured the dining room, 12 by 14. I measured the entry hall, 5 feet wide. That's 32 feet across the front. But the house was 40 feet across the front. There was 8 feet of house somewhere that I could not see. I stood in the entry hall with my tape measure and my pencil, and I looked at the wall between the entry hall and the front parlor. It was a normal wall, papered in a pale green pattern of ferns, a doorway between the 2 rooms, no sign of anything unusual. I tapped it. It sounded like a wall, solid on the parlor side, hollow briefly at the doorframe, solid again. I looked at the wall between the parlor and the dining room, also normal, also solid. But between the entry hall and the outside of the house, on the left side, there had to be 8 feet of something. I stepped outside. I walked around the left side of the house. There were no windows on that side, which was not unusual for a house of that age in that region. Just clapboard, solid, unpainted at the corners where the paint had failed. I paced it out. 40 feet along the front, 42 feet down the left side, 40 feet across the back, 42 feet up the right side. It closed. It was a rectangle. The outside was consistent. The inside was 8 feet short. I stood in the yard for a while, and I told myself I had made an error. Not a shameful thing. Every surveyor makes errors. That's why we measure twice. I went back in. I measured everything again. I got the same numbers. I sat down on the horsehair sofa in the front parlor, and I ate a sandwich I had brought in a paper sack, and I thought about it. Now, here is the second small thing, and this one I want you to hold in your mind, because it comes back later. When I sat down on the sofa, I noticed a photograph on the wall opposite, a large photograph framed in dark wood of a family, mother, father, 3 children, sepia print. The father was a tall, thin man in a black suit. The mother was a small, round woman with her hair up. The children were 2 boys and a girl, all standing very straight, all staring at the camera with that solemn look people used to get when photographs took a long time to expose. The girl in the photograph looked exactly like a girl I had known when I was 10 years old. Her name had been Nell Ainsley, and she had lived in a house down the road from my parents' house in the town where I grew up, which was 200 miles from Butler County, and she had died in 1947 of scarlet fever, and I had not thought about her in 20 years. The girl in the photograph had her face, exactly her face, the same wide-set eyes, the same slight overbite, the same dark hair parted in the middle and tied back with what looked like a white ribbon. I stood up. I walked to the photograph. I looked at it close. It was Nell Ainsley, not a girl who resembled her, not a coincidence. The tiny scar on her chin from when she fell off a fence in 1945 was visible in the photograph. I remembered the day she got that scar. I had been there. She had cried, and my mother had cleaned her chin with a wet cloth, and my mother had said, "Well, that'll leave a little mark." The little mark was on the girl in the photograph. The photograph, by its style and its paper and its frame, was easily 70 or 80 years old. I looked at the boys in the photograph. I did not know them. I looked at the mother. I did not know her. I looked at the father. The father was me, not a man who looked like me, not a resemblance. Me, my face, 30 years older perhaps, gaunt from something, hair gone white. But my face, the mole on my left temple, the slight kink in my nose from when I broke it playing football in high school, the way my left eye sits a quarter-inch lower than my right, which is a thing my wife had teased me about for years. Me, photographed sometime around 1890, in a house I had never been in, standing beside a girl who had died when I was 10. I want to tell you that I ran out of the house. I did not. I want to tell you that I got in my truck and drove straight back to Bowling Green and told Ambrose Coldwell to find another surveyor. I did not. I sat back down on the horsehair sofa and I looked at the photograph and I told myself things. I told myself I was mistaken about the girl. She had been 10 when she died. The girl in the photograph was maybe 12. It had been a long time. I was misremembering. I told myself the man was not me. Men look alike. I was tired from the drive. My mind was playing a trick. I told myself these things for perhaps 15 minutes, and when I got up from the sofa, I had convinced myself well enough to keep working. That is the thing about this kind of horror, friend. It doesn't come at you all at once. It gives you time to talk yourself out of it. It waits, patient, while you build a small, careful wall of reasonable explanations. And then, when the wall is built, it steps around it. I went upstairs. The staircase creaked at the 4th step. I made a note of it in my field book because that is what a surveyor does. Note anomalies. I reached the landing. The upstairs hall ran east and west. Ambrose had said not to open the door on the 2nd floor at the end of the north hallway. There was no north hallway. The upstairs hallway ran east and west. 2 doors on the north side, 2 doors on the south side, a window at the east end, a window at the west end. That was the whole upstairs. There was no hallway running north from the landing. There was no door at the end of any hallway going north because there was no hallway going north. I stood on the landing and I looked at the layout, and I thought about the 8 feet. The 8 feet that were missing from the ground floor. They would be, if you traced them upward, right about where a north hallway would begin. I opened the 4 doors on the ground floor pattern upstairs. 2 bedrooms on the north side, a bathroom on the south side, a small bedroom on the south side. That was it. Nothing that added up to a missing 8 feet. I stood in the upstairs hallway. I looked at the wall between the 2 north bedrooms. It was a normal wall, papered in the same pale green fern pattern as downstairs. I tapped it. Solid, solid. Then, in one spot, right at the center, hollow. I tapped again. Hollow, about the size of a door frame. I ran my hand over the wallpaper, and I felt under the paper the outline of a door, papered over, sealed shut. The door Ambrose had told me not to open, which was not at the end of a north hallway, because there was no north hallway, but which was here, papered over, in the wall between 2 bedrooms, where no door should have been. Now, I want to be clear about something. I did not open that door, not that day. I did as I was told. I finished my sketch of the upstairs. I noted the sealed doorway in my field book. I wrote, papered over door and north wall of upstairs hall, do not open per client instruction. I went back downstairs. I packed up my equipment. I locked the front door with Ambrose's key. I got in my truck. I drove back to Bowling Green. But the drive took me longer than it should have. Not because of traffic, because I stopped 3 times along the way and got out of the truck and stood by the side of the road and looked at the trees and tried to remember something. I could feel it at the edge of my mind, the way you can feel a word at the edge of your mind when you can't quite say it. It was there. It was almost there. And each time I got in the truck and drove on, it slipped back down into wherever it had come from, and I could not catch it. I got home after dark. My wife Ellen was in the kitchen. She said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, "I'm just tired." I ate supper. I went to bed. I dreamed of the house. Not exactly a dream. It was more like a memory. I was in the upstairs hall. I was opening the papered-over door. The door was opening easy, as if it had been oiled. Behind it was a hallway. The north hallway, 8 feet wide, running north from the landing into the darkness. At the end of it, a door. Behind the door, a room. The room was mine. I mean, it was arranged for me. There was a bed with a quilt my mother had made. There was a chair by the window with my grandfather's pipe in the ashtray beside it. There was a small side table with a book on it, opened to the page I had last read, which was a book I had not thought of in 20 years. The room had been kept for me, kept clean, kept ready, as if someone had been waiting for me to come home. I woke up at 3 in the morning. Ellen was asleep beside me. The house was quiet. I lay in the dark and I thought about the photograph, the man who was me, the girl who was Nell Ainsley, the 3 children, the mother. I had not looked closely at the mother. I could not remember her face. I tried. I closed my eyes and I tried to bring her face up in my mind. It would not come. There was a shape where her face should have been. A dark oval, but no features, no eyes, no mouth, nothing my mind would give me. I got out of bed. I went downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table and I drank a glass of water, and I thought, I have to go back. I thought this against my will. I did not want to go back. I wanted to hand the file to another surveyor and pretend I had never taken the job. But I knew, sitting there in the dark, that I would go back, that I had to, that the house had shown me something and I had to know what it was. I drove back to Butler County the next morning. I told Ellen I had left equipment at the site. She kissed my cheek and said, "Drive careful." I drove careful. I got to the house at 11 o'clock in the morning. The sun was high. The rocking chairs on the porch were exactly where they had been. The keys were still in my pocket. I unlocked the door. I went in. I went straight upstairs. I did not stop in the parlor. I did not look at the photograph. I did not want to see it. I walked up the staircase, past the 4th step that creaked onto the landing. I turned to the wall in the hallway where the paper door was. The wallpaper had been peeled back. Someone had peeled it. In the 24 hours since I had left, someone had peeled the wallpaper back from the door, neatly, carefully, leaving the paper hanging in a curl to one side, exposing a plain white door with a black iron knob. The door was ajar, just a crack, an inch, enough to see that there was darkness beyond it. I stood on the landing a long time. I listened. The house was quiet. Not the false quiet of the day before when I could feel something behind the quiet, a real quiet, a patient quiet, a quiet that was waiting to see what I would do. I said out loud, "Is anyone here?" Nothing answered. I said, "I was told not to open this door." The door opened another inch, on its own, no hand, no draft. It swung slow and deliberate, and it stopped when it was opened just wide enough for me to walk through. I walked through. The hallway beyond was exactly as I had dreamed it, 8 feet wide plank floors, wall-papered in the same pale green ferns, a ceiling gaslight fixture unlit that no house in that county had used in 50 years. The hallway ran north for perhaps 20 feet. At the end, a door. I walked to the door. I did not think about turning back. I don't remember thinking about anything. I remember only walking, and the sound of my own boots on the boards, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco, which was the tobacco my grandfather had smoked, which I had not smelled in real life since 1952. I opened the door at the end. The room was mine. It was mine, the way the dream had shown me. Bed with my mother's quilt, the log cabin pattern in reds and browns. Chair by the window, my grandfather's pipe on the little brass ashtray. Side table with a book. I walked to the book. It was the book I had been reading the summer of 1947, the summer Nell Ainsley died. Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. Opened to page 83. The page I had been on when the news came about Nell, and after which I had not been able to finish the book because reading felt indecent while a girl I had known was being buried. I looked around the room. There was a small writing desk against the wall opposite the window. There was a chest of drawers. There was a wardrobe. There was a wash stand with a china pitcher and basin. And on the wall above the bed, there was a photograph. A large photograph, framed in dark wood, of a family, mother, father, 3 children, sepia print. But this photograph was different. The father was me, same face as the one downstairs, but older, much older, white-bearded, bent, hands like an old man's hands, veined and thin. The girl was not Nell Ainsley. The girl in this photograph was my daughter Beth, who was 12 years old that autumn, who was at home in Bowling Green, who had left for school that morning wearing a red sweater and a plaid skirt. The 2 boys were my sons, my son Michael and my son David, aged in the photograph perhaps 10 and 8. Which was their age now? Which was their age that very day? The mother was Ellen, my wife, standing beside me, her hand on Beth's shoulder, her face clear and perfect and lovely and looking directly at the camera, photographed by the style of it, sometime around 1890. I sat down on the bed. I sat there a long time. I don't know how long. The light through the window did not change. There was no clock in the room, and my pocket watch, when I looked at it, read 3 minutes past 4, which was the last time my pocket watch would ever read anything else, though I did not know that yet. I understood, sitting on that bed, several things at once. I understood that the house had been waiting for me, that the room had been prepared for me before I was born, that the woman who had died in April was not the owner of the house. She was the caretaker. She had kept it clean. She had waxed the floors and dusted the plates and oiled the hinges. She had been keeping it ready all her life for me to come. I understood that the photograph in the parlor downstairs, the one with Nell Ainsley in it, was not a photograph of me in a past life or a photograph of some ancestor. It was a photograph of me in this life, taken here, in this room. At some point I had not yet reached, but would. I understood that the papered-over door had not been sealed to keep something in. It had been sealed to keep me out until I was ready. And the old woman had sealed it, and the old woman had died, and the sealing had come undone, and the door had opened for me because I had come to it, and I had walked through, and now I was in the room, and the room was mine. I understood that I would sit on this bed, and eventually I would lie down, and eventually I would sleep. And when I woke up, I would be an old man, and the family in the photograph on the wall would be my family, aged into the photograph, and I would not remember Bowling Green, and I would not remember Ellen or Beth or Michael or David as they were now, and I would only remember them as the photograph, as the still solemn faces in a sepia print, and I would sit in this room, and I would keep it clean, and I would wait for the next surveyor to come, 30 years from now, 40, 50, and I would be the photograph in the parlor for him, and he would sit on the horsehair sofa and think he recognized the man, and he would tell himself he was mistaken, and he would go upstairs, and he would find the door, and on, world without end. I stood up. I don't know where I found the strength. I have thought about it every day since. I think it was the thought of Beth in the red sweater. I think it was the thought of Ellen waiting for me at supper. I think it was the small, ordinary weight of my life pulling on me harder in that moment than the house pulled. I walked out of the room. I walked back down the north hallway. I walked past the peeled wallpaper. I walked down the stairs. I did not go into the parlor. I did not look at the photograph. I walked straight out the front door, and I locked it behind me, and I got in my truck, and I drove. I drove to Bowling Green. I did not stop. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I told Ambrose Coldwell that afternoon that I would not finish the survey. I told him to give the job to another man. He looked at me a long time over his walnut face, and he said, "Son, did you open the door?" I said, "No." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm sure." He looked at me a long time more, and then he said, "All right, son, all right. Go home to your wife." I went home. I hugged my wife. I hugged my children. I ate supper. I have lived 38 more years since that day. My children are grown. My wife has been gone 6 years, buried in the town where I grew up, near the grave of a girl named Nell Ainsley who died in 1947. But here's the thing, friend. Here's the thing that keeps me up some nights. I lied to Ambrose Coldwell. I did open the door. And every year I get older, and every year I look in the mirror and I see a little more. The man in the photograph. The white beard is coming in. The hands are thinning. The left eye sits a little lower than the right, more each year. And I dream sometimes of a room with a quilt on the bed and a pipe in an ashtray and a book open to page 83. I dream that the room is empty. I dream that it is still waiting. I dream that one of these mornings I am going to wake up in it. And I don't know, friend. I don't know if I have lived these 38 years, or if I only dreamed them, sitting on the edge of that bed in a house in Butler County, waiting for the next surveyor to come. I don't know which side of the door I'm on. I have never known. I don't think I ever will. Story 4. The man who told me this died the following spring. I never learned if that was connected, and I have tried not to think too hard about it, because thinking too hard about a thing is sometimes the way you invite it into your own house. His name was Wendell August Krause, and he was a volunteer firefighter in a small logging town in the Cascades in the winter of 1979. And what he saw in that snow he carried with him until the day he sat down at his kitchen table and did not get up again. Now, listen close. This is how he told it to me, over 3 nights in a diner in Roseburg, Oregon, in the spring of 1991, and I have written it down as best as I can remember. Some of the details are his exact words. Some are the shape of what he has said. The truth of it, I believe, is all his. Wendell was 37 that winter. He worked the day shift at a lumber mill outside a town called Cedar Halt, up in the Cascades about 60 miles east of Eugene. Cedar Halt was not much of a town. 211 souls, according to the sign at the edge of town, though Wendell said the sign had read 211 for at least 15 years, and the real number was probably closer to 160 by 1979. The young people had been leaving since the war. The old people had been staying and dying, and the sign had been staying the same. He lived alone in a small cedar shake house on a lane called Alder Creek Road, half a mile off the main highway. He was not married. He had been engaged once in 1968 to a girl named Margaret who worked at the diner, but Margaret had gone to Portland to visit her sister in the summer of '69 and had never come back. And Wendell had never really tried to bring her back because he understood, in the way a certain kind of quiet man understands these things, that she had been looking for a reason to leave, and he had given her one by being exactly who he was. He was not bitter about it. He said so at the diner. He said she was right to go. I would have gone too if I'd been her. He was a volunteer firefighter because Cedar Halt did not have a paid department. 12 men on the roster. Old red hand-me-down truck from a bigger town down the valley. A siren mounted on the roof of the town hall that could be heard for 4 miles when the wind was right. When the siren went, the 12 of them dropped what they were doing and came running, and Wendell was one of the runners. And he took it seriously because in a town of 160 souls, taking a thing seriously was one of the few ways left to feel useful. The winter of 1979 started early and hard. The first snow came the second week of November. The second snow came 4 days after that. By the 1st of December, there was 3 feet on the ground, and the county plows were running 20 hours a day. By Christmas Eve, there was 5 feet, and the highway had been closed twice, and the little grocery in Cedar Halt was down to canned beans and powdered milk and cigarettes because the delivery truck had not made it up the pass in 9 days. The siren went at 4:17 in the afternoon on the 28th of December. Wendell was at home. He had come off shift at the mill at 3, driven the 6 miles into Cedar Halt through snow up to his hubcaps, stopped at the grocery for a can of soup and a loaf of bread, and driven back out to Alder Creek Road. He was sitting at his kitchen table eating the soup when the siren went. He heard it faint through the double-paned windows, muffled by the snow banked up against the north wall of the house. He set down his spoon. He pulled on his boots and his coat and his hat, and he went out to the truck. The truck started on the 3rd try. He backed out of his drive. He drove the half-mile down Alder Creek Road to the highway, and he turned toward town. He passed 1 car on the way in. It was a green Plymouth going the other direction, moving slow through the snow with its headlights on. Wendell recognized the car. It belonged to a man named Coy Everstat, who ran the little post office in town. Coy raised his hand as they passed each other. Wendell raised his hand back. He thought briefly that it was strange for Coy to be leaving town in the middle of a fire call, because Coy was on the volunteer roster same as him. But Wendell figured Coy had a reason, and he did not think about it again for another 2 hours, and by then it was too late to ask. The fire was at the Halverson place. Wendell knew this before he arrived, because from a mile out he could see the smoke going up in a black column against the gray sky. The Halversons lived on a piece of land at the north end of town, an old homestead with a farmhouse and a barn and 2 outbuildings, all of them wood, all of them dry inside from a hard winter of heating. The father, Niels Halverson, was 91 and mostly bedridden. He lived with his son Peter, who was 60-something, and Peter's wife Birgit, who was 50-something. There had been children once, but they had all moved down to Portland years back, and it was just the 3 old ones now up on that homestead, keeping the stove going through the winter. Wendell pulled up at 4:29. The truck was there ahead of him, red against the white, and 4 of the other volunteers were already off it and running with hoses. The farmhouse was on fire, not the barn, not the outbuildings, just the farmhouse. The whole south wall was up in flames, and the roof had begun to catch, and the smoke was rolling black and thick out of the eaves. Wendell ran to the truck. The fire chief, a man named Ollie Prine, was shouting at him to grab an axe and come around the back. Wendell grabbed the axe. He ran around the back of the farmhouse, sinking to his knees in the snow with every step, breathing hard already because he was not a young man anymore, and the cold was thin in his lungs. The back of the farmhouse had a kitchen door. Ollie was at the door. He was yelling something Wendell could not hear over the roar of the fire. Wendell got closer. Ollie yelled, "Kraus, Niels is inside. We can't get him out through the front. Break the door." Wendell broke the door. 3 swings of the axe. The wood was old and splintered easy. He kicked the door in. Smoke rolled out black and hot, and behind the smoke was a red glow that was not the light of a lamp. He and Ollie went in. Now here is where Wendell's story slows down, and here is where I have to slow down with it, because what he described was a thing that happens sometimes in a fire. When the world compresses and time stretches and every second lasts a minute and every minute lasts an hour, and a man can walk through what feels like a lifetime in the space of 2 breaths. The kitchen was full of smoke. Wendell got down on his hands and knees. He crawled. Ollie was beside him, breathing through a wet rag. They crawled across the kitchen floor toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. They found Peter Halverson in the hallway. He was on his back. He had not made it out of the hall. His clothes were smoldering, but he was not burned yet, and Ollie grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him back toward the kitchen door. Wendell kept crawling. Niels's bedroom was at the end of the hall. He passed a doorway on his left. He glanced in without meaning to. It was a small sitting room. There was a woman in a chair by the window. She was sitting very still, not slumped, not fallen, sitting upright, hands folded in her lap, head slightly tilted. Birgit Halverson. The room was on fire around her. The curtains were burning. The rug was burning. But she was sitting in the chair, and she was looking at him. Wendell said, "Birgit, Birgit, come on." She did not move. He said, "We got to go, Birgit." She turned her head, slow, toward him. Her face was calm. She said, "Wendell, go get Niels." He said, "You come too." She said, "I'm not leaving." She said, "Get Niels, please." He stared at her for a second, 2 seconds. The heat was tremendous now, and the smoke was thickening, and he knew if he did not move, he would not move at all. He moved. He crawled past the sitting room to the end of the hall. Niels's door was closed. He pushed it open. Niels was in the bed. The old man was 91 years old and thin as a rail, and he was awake, and he was staring at the ceiling, and he was breathing shallow. And when Wendell touched his shoulder, Niels looked at him with clear blue eyes and said, "You came." Wendell said, "I did. Come on." He wrapped Niels in the quilt from the bed. He lifted him. The old man weighed almost nothing, 90 pounds maybe. Wendell carried him back down the hall. The doorway to the sitting room was still open as he passed it. He looked in again. He could not help it. The chair by the window was empty. The room was still burning, the curtains, the rug, the wallpaper. But the chair where Birgit had been sitting was empty. No one in it, no one on the floor, no one anywhere in that room. He did not stop. He carried Niels out through the kitchen. He carried him out the broken back door. He carried him across the snow to the truck, and Ollie helped him get the old man wrapped in more blankets. And one of the other volunteers, a kid named Gil Roeder, started the engine and got the heater going, and they set Niels in the cab of the truck to warm him. Wendell said to Ollie, "Where's Birgit?" Ollie said, "We got her. She's fine. She's over there." Ollie pointed. Wendell looked. There was a group of people standing near the barn wrapped in blankets, 2 men from the fire crew, and Peter Halverson sitting on a milk can looking dazed, and a woman standing beside Peter with her hand on his shoulder. The woman was Birgit Halverson. She was wrapped in a wool blanket. Her hair was disheveled. There was soot on her face. She was looking down at Peter and saying something to him quiet. Wendell walked over. He said, "Birgit." She looked up. Her eyes were tired and red. She said, "Wendell, thank God. Is he alive?" Wendell said, "He's alive. He's in the truck." She said, "Oh, thank God." Wendell said, "When did you get out?" She said, "Ollie brought me out, right at the start. I was in the kitchen when it started. Ollie came around back, and I came right out with him." Wendell looked at Ollie. Ollie nodded. He said, "She was the first one out. She was standing in the yard when we got the hose going." Wendell said, "You were in the kitchen?" Birgit said, "Yes." Wendell said, "You were not in the sitting room?" She said, "No." "Why?" He looked at her. He looked at the burning house. The sitting room window was on the north side, and he could see it from where he stood. The window had blown out now. Flames were coming out of it, but it was clearly the same room, the same window, the same north wall. He said, "Nothing." I was confused. She said, "You look pale, Wendell." He said, "I'm all right." He walked away from her. He walked back to the truck. He sat down on the tailgate. He watched the house burn. He thought about the woman in the chair, the woman who had said, "Wendell, go get Niels." She had known his name. She had known Niels's name. She had told him to go, and he had gone. And when he came back, the chair was empty. And Birgit Halverson, the real one, was standing by the barn, and had been standing by the barn the whole time, and had never been in that sitting room. Somebody else had been in that chair. Somebody who looked like her. Somebody who had said her words. Somebody who had made him keep moving down the hall to save an old man who might otherwise have died in his bed. Now here is where the small things started, and Wendell told me at the diner in Roseburg that if the small things had come first before the fire, he might have paid attention. He might have understood. But they came after, and by then he was raw from what he had seen and heard, and he did not have the wits left to piece them together in time. The first small thing was the snow. Wendell drove home that night about 10 o'clock, after the fire was out, and the Halversons had been taken down to a cousin's house on the south end of town. He drove out to Alder Creek Road. He turned into his drive. He parked the truck. He got out and stood in the snow. His yard was full of footprints. Not his footprints, somebody else's. Big boot prints, size 12 at least, coming up the drive from the road, going around the north side of the house, coming to the front porch, coming to the front door, stopping at the front door, coming back down the porch steps, going around the south side of the house, coming back to the drive, standing in the drive for a while because there was a churned-up patch where a man had shifted his weight from foot to foot. Then going back down the drive to the road. The prints were sharp, fresh. They had been made in the past hour, because the snow had been falling light all evening, and there was only a dust of new snow in the tops of the prints. Wendell followed them out to the road. They went out to the road, they crossed the road, and they stopped at the edge of the woods on the other side. They did not go into the woods. They just stopped, as if a man had walked out of the woods, come to Wendell's house, gone all around it, come back to the road, and then walked back into the woods without leaving prints on the return trip. Wendell stood there a long time. He shone his flashlight into the woods. He saw nothing but trees. He went back to the house. He checked all the doors, all locked. He checked all the windows, all shut. He went inside. Nothing had been touched. His soup bowl was still on the kitchen table where he had left it. the spoon still in the bowl. The bowl still had soup in it, though the soup was cold now, and a skin had formed on top. He ate the soup anyway. He was not hungry. He ate it because eating was a thing a living man did, and he wanted to do a thing a living man did. The second small thing was the phone. At 11:40 that night, the phone rang. Wendell was sitting in his chair by the fireplace, staring at the fire, trying not to think about the woman in the chair. He got up and answered. There was breathing on the other end. He said, "Hello." The breathing continued, slow, even, the way a person breathes when they are not doing anything but breathing. He said, "Who is this?" The breathing continued. He said, "I'll hang up." The voice said, "Wendell." It was his own voice, not a voice that sounded like his voice. He knew his own voice. Every man does. It said, "Wendell," and it said it in exactly the tone he would have said it, with the same slight roughness he had in his voice from years of working in the sawdust of the mill. He said, "Who is this?" The voice said, "Wendell, go get Niels." He hung up. His hand was shaking. He unplugged the phone from the wall. He sat back down by the fire. The third small thing was the mirror. He got up at 2 in the morning to use the bathroom. He turned on the light in the bathroom. He looked in the mirror over the sink. His reflection was there, but his reflection was wet. Wet, the way a man is wet who has just come in from the snow, hair damp, cheeks red, coat still on, though he was wearing pajamas in the actual bathroom. And in the mirror, his reflection was breathing hard, the way he had been breathing hard when he came out of the burning house that afternoon. He raised his hand. The reflection did not raise its hand. The reflection stood there breathing hard, coat wet with melted snow, looking at him. He said out loud, "No." The reflection said out loud in his voice, "Go get Niels." Then his reflection blinked, slow, and when the eyes opened, they were his eyes again, and the coat was gone, and he was standing in his pajamas, looking at a man in pajamas, and the mirror was normal. He turned off the light. He went back to bed. He did not sleep. The fourth small thing was the letter. It came in the mail 2 days later, December 30th. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. His name and address were typed. The postmark was smudged and unreadable, but the stamp was a regular first-class stamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, typed, was a list. The list read, Niels Halverson, 91, saved. Peter Halverson, 63, saved. Birgit Halverson, 58, saved. Coy Everstad, 54, not saved. Wendell read the list 3 times. He did not understand it. Coy Everstad was the postmaster, the man who had waved at him from the green Plymouth on the way into town during the fire. He drove into town. It was 10 in the morning. The snow had stopped. The plows had been through. He went to the post office. The post office was closed. A handwritten sign was on the door. It said, "Closed due to death in family." Wendell went across the street to the diner. He asked the waitress. The waitress said, "Oh, Wendell, you didn't hear. Coy went off the road 2 nights ago, coming back into town from somewhere. His car went into the creek. They didn't find him till yesterday morning." Wendell said, 2 nights ago. Which night? She said, the 28th, night of the Halverson fire. He said, what time? She said, they think about 5 o'clock. Right around when the fire started, actually. Isn't that strange? Wendell said, I saw him. She said, what? He said, I saw him. I saw him driving out of town when I was driving in for the fire. He waved at me. She looked at him a long time. She said, Wendell, That's not possible. His car was in the creek by then. He'd been in the water for hours before you drove in." He said nothing. She said, "You must be misremembering. It was a stressful evening." He said, "Yes, I must be." He went home. He sat at his kitchen table. He looked at the list on the paper. Coy Everstad. 54. Not saved. And he understood, or he began to understand, somebody had made a list of the people whose lives were in the balance that night. Somebody had decided who would be saved and who would not. Somebody had been at the Halverson house before the fire started and had known who was inside and had known who would die and who would live and had been there to nudge the fire in the direction it needed to go. And that somebody had sat in a chair by the window in a burning house, wearing Birgit Halverson's face, and had told Wendell to keep moving down the hallway to save Niels, because Niels was on the list. Niels was to be saved. But Coy Everstad was not on the list. Coy was to be not saved, and Coy had gone off the road at exactly the time the siren went, at exactly the moment when every man on the fire roster was called into town, at exactly the moment when no one would be on the road to find him. And the man who had waved at Wendell from the green Plymouth had been not Coy, had been the same something that had sat in the chair, had been out driving the roads that night, making sure everyone was where they were meant to be, so that the list could be honored. Wendell told me at the diner in Roseburg that he burned the letter that afternoon. He burned it in his kitchen stove, and he watched it burn, and he did not tell anyone about it. But that was not the end of it. The fifth small thing was the ledger. 2 weeks later, in the middle of January, Wendell got another envelope. Same plain white, same typed address, same smudged postmark. Inside was another list. The list read, Vera Aldis, 82, to be saved, Marlon Groves. 41, to be saved, Deirdre Groves. 9, to be saved, Ida Roeder. 76, not to be saved. And below the list, one more line, typed in the same face, fire, January 18th, 1902, in the evening, Groves residence. Wendell stared at the paper. January 18th was in 3 days. He drove into town. He drove past the Groves house. It was a small green house on Fir Street. He knew Marlon Groves. He'd been on the fire crew with him before Marlon's back went out. The little girl, Deirdre, was in 3rd grade at the school. The old woman, Ida Roeder, was Gil Roeder's grandmother, who lived alone in a trailer at the edge of town. He did not know what to do. He did not sleep that night or the next. On the 17th, he decided he would warn them, all of them. He would tell them a fire was coming. He would get them out of their houses on the 18th. He would break the list. He went to Marlon Groves' house on the morning of the 18th. He knocked. Marlon answered. Wendell said, "Marlon, you have to get out of the house tonight. All of you. Take Deirdre and Sarah and go stay with your brother in Springfield tonight." Marlon said, "What are you talking about, Wendell?" Wendell said, Please just do it." Marlon looked at him hard. Marlon said, "Wendell, are you all right?" Wendell said, "I have a bad feeling. Please, just for one night." Marlon was a decent man. He said, "Wendell, all right. If it's that important to you, we'll go to Ted's. But you're going to explain this to me when I get back." Wendell said, "I will." Then he drove out to Ida Roeder's trailer. He knocked on her door. She came to the door in her housecoat. She was 80 years old and small and hard of hearing. He said, "Ida, you have to come with me. You can't stay here tonight." She said, "What?" He said louder, "You have to come with me tonight. There might be a fire." She said, "A fire." "There's no fire, Wendell." He said, "Not yet." "But there might be. Please, come to my house. You can stay with me tonight." She stared at him. She said, "Wendell Krause, are you drunk?" He said, "No, Ida, I swear I'm not. Please." She said, "I am not going anywhere. I am staying in my home. If there is a fire, the fire will find me here." She shut the door. He stood on her porch. He knocked again. She did not answer. He knocked for 10 minutes. She did not answer. He drove home. The siren went at 9:17 that night. He drove to the fire. It was Ida Roeder's trailer. It was fully engulfed. By the time he got there was nothing to do. Ollie Prine looked at him across the burning trailer and shook his head slow. They found Ida in her bed the next morning. She had died in her sleep of smoke before the fire had reached her. The Groves family was safe in Springfield. Marlin came home the next day. He came to Wendell's house. He said, "Wendell, I need you to tell me how you knew." Wendell told him. He told him the whole thing, the list, the letter, the fire at the Halversons, the woman in the chair, the reflection in the mirror, the green Plymouth on the road. Marlin listened. When Wendell was done, Marlin said, "Wendell, that is the strangest story I have ever heard in my life, and I don't know what to make of it. But I know you saved my daughter's life, and so I am not going to say a word to anyone. And I am going to tell you one thing, and then I am going to leave, and we are never going to talk about this again." He said, "Wendell, don't open the next letter." Then he left. Wendell got another letter in February. He did not open it. He burned it. He got another in March. He burned that one too. He got one in May, in July, in September. He burned them all. There were no more fires in Cedar Halt that year, none the year after. The old people died in their beds of ordinary things. The young people kept leaving for Portland. The sign at the edge of town still read 211. Wendell lived in that house on Alder Creek Road for another 10 years. The letters kept coming once every few months. He never opened another one. He burned them all. He told me all this in Roseburg in the spring of 1991. He had moved down to Roseburg to live with his sister after his health went bad. He was 50 then, and he looked 70. His hands shook. He drank his coffee with both hands wrapped around the cup because otherwise he spilled it. I asked him at the end of the third night why he had told me the story. He said, "Because I want somebody to know, and I don't have anybody else to tell." I asked him if he was afraid. He said, "Not of the fire, not anymore." I said, "Of what then?" He said, "I am afraid that when I die, I will find out I was on a list, that my name was on a piece of paper somewhere, that I was to be saved on a night I do not remember, and that somebody kept me alive all these years for a reason I don't understand, and that the reason is coming." He died the following spring, in his sister's house in Roseburg, at the kitchen table. Heart attack, they said, 61 years old. She found him with his hands folded in front of him on the table, and in front of him, unopened, was a plain white envelope. No return address. Typed. She did not open it. She burned it in the wood stove because he had told her before he died that if a letter came, she was to burn it and never look at what was inside. She told me this at his funeral. I have thought about it many times since. I have wondered if there is a list somewhere with my name on it. I have wondered if there is one with yours. I have wondered if the small, unexplainable things in a life, the times we should have died and didn't, the strangers who appeared at exactly the right moment and disappeared after. The times we felt watched in an empty room are the work of some quiet clerk somewhere who keeps a ledger and makes decisions we are not meant to know about. I don't know, friend. I have never opened a letter I did not recognize the return address on. I don't intend to start now. Story 5. A stranger left me this handwritten in the pages of an old Bible, and I did not read what he had written for almost 2 years after I came into possession of the book, because the book was one of many in a lot I bought at an estate auction, and I did not open it for a long time, and when I did, I wished I had not, and then I wished I had opened it sooner, and I have never quite made peace with either of those wishes. Now listen close. This is the longest tale I have to tell tonight, and the strangest, and I will do my best to lay it out for you the way it came to me, in the order it came to me, so that you can understand it the same way I did. Slow, in pieces, each piece rearranging what came before it. The story concerns a man named Isaiah Foote Purnell, an antique dealer and estate picker out of a small town in eastern Ohio called New Palestine. He was 58 years old in the autumn of 1994 when what I am about to describe began, and by the winter of 1995 when it ended, he was, in the ways that matter, no longer the man he had been. Whether he was still Isaiah Foote Purnell at all is a question the story asks and does not answer, and I will not answer it for you here, because I do not know the answer. Isaiah lived alone in an old house on Miller Street, 3 blocks off the courthouse square in New Palestine, Ohio hill country, the kind of town that had once been prosperous when the coal was still coming out of the ground down south, and that had been slowly emptying since the mines closed in the 60s. Population when Isaiah was a boy, 3,000. Population in 94, 800 and change. 2 hardware stores gone, 3 churches consolidated into one. The old high school shut down, and the children bused to a bigger town 12 miles east. He had a shop on the square, Purnell's Antiques and Curiosities, a narrow storefront between a barber and a shoe repair, both of which were also failing. He had inherited the shop from his father in 1978, and he had run it alone since. He was unmarried. He had been married once, briefly, in 1969, to a girl named Louetta Bishop, but the marriage had lasted 11 months and ended when Louetta went to Cleveland and did not come back, and Isaiah had, in the way of certain small-town men, decided he was not built for the state of matrimony, and had left it alone since. His work was estate picking. When old folks died and their houses were emptied, Isaiah would come with his pickup truck and buy the lot. Furniture, books, dishes, framed photographs, whatever the family did not want. He would sort it in his shop, price the good pieces, put the rest in a back room to be dealt with eventually. It was slow work and honest work, and it suited him. The estate that started this business was that of a widow named Zenobia Amaryllis Trevor, who had died in September of 94 at the age of 96 in a farmhouse 7 miles outside of town on a road called Old Sawmill Pike. Miss Trevor, as everyone had called her, had lived alone in that farmhouse for the last 40 years of her life, after her husband Silas had died in a hunting accident in 1954. She had no children. She had one nephew in Columbus who did not want the house or its contents, and who called Isaiah in October to come clear the place. Isaiah drove out to Old Sawmill Pike on the morning of the 12th of October. It was a cool, bright day, the kind of Ohio October that makes you forgive the state for its winters. The maples along the roads were turning. The corn had been cut in the fields. The farmhouse sat back from the road at the end of a long gravel drive, 2 stories of white clapboard with green shutters and a wide front porch. It looked, from the road, like a house someone still lived in. The nephew had left the door unlocked and the key under the porch mat for when Isaiah was done. Isaiah went inside. The house was still furnished. Everything as Miss Travers had left it. Dishes in the drying rack by the sink. A cup of tea gone dry to a brown film on the kitchen table. A crocheted afghan folded over the arm of a rocking chair in the front room, and a knitting basket beside the chair with a half-finished scarf in it and 2 wooden needles crossed like an X on top of the yarn. Isaiah started in the front room. He always started in the front rooms. You get a feel for the person that way, and the feel helps you price things. He walked slow, looking. The furniture was old and good. A horsehair sofa, 2 matching wingback chairs, a cherrywood side table with cloth feet, a bookshelf full of books, mostly religious, mostly older than the house. The books were what he wanted. He priced books by the shelf, not the volume, unless he saw something rare. And Miss Travers' shelves looked promising. He took a cardboard box off the porch and started filling it with the top shelf. First editions of Methodist tracts, a leather-bound Pilgrim's Progress, 3 volumes of a 19th century commentary on the epistles, a Fox's Book of Martyrs with hand-colored plates. On the second shelf, in among the smaller books, he found the Bible. It was not a large Bible. It was a personal Bible, about the size of a paperback novel, bound in black leather that had gone brown at the corners from handling. The spine was cracked but held. The pages were gilt-edged, tarnished now to a dull yellow. There was no name embossed on the cover. There was no bookmark. There were no visible notes. He almost put it in the box without looking at it because he had seen 10,000 small black Bibles in his career, and this one, on first glance, looked ordinary. But something made him open it. He could not have told you what. He said later that his hand went to it before his mind caught up. The way a hand goes to a stove that isn't hot yet, and then you find out it is. He opened it to the front. The fly-leaf was blank. The next page, where the family record usually is, was not blank. There were names written on it, in a careful old hand in brown ink, gone almost to sepia. Under a printed heading that read, Births, there were 7 names. Under marriages, 3 names. Under deaths, 4 names. Isaiah read the names. He did not know any of them. But at the bottom of the birth section, written in the same careful hand, was the 8th name, Isaiah Foote Purnell, born August 4th, 1861. He stared at it. He said out loud in Miss Travers' empty front room, "That is not possible." He was Isaiah Foote Purnell. He had been born on August 4th, but in 1936, not in 1861. The name in the Bible was his exact name, first, middle, and last, which was not a common combination. Foote was his mother's maiden name. Purnell was his father's line, which went back in that part of Ohio to about 1850. Isaiah was after his great-great-grandfather, his great-great-grandfather, his great-great-grandfather, Isaiah Foote Purnell. He had known there was one. His father had mentioned him once or twice. Old Isaiah, they had called him. He had lived on a farm somewhere over toward the Pennsylvania line. He had died sometime around the turn of the century. He had not been discussed much because there had been some kind of trouble in the family about him, some kind of thing that was not spoken of. And by the time Isaiah the younger had gotten curious enough to ask, his father was dead, and the story was gone. But here was the name, written in a family Bible in the house of a woman he did not know. He read the death section again. Silas Egbert Traver, died November 11th, 1954, age 72. That was Miss Traver's husband. That fit. That was the hunting accident. Zenobia Amaryllis Traver, born 1898. She was in the birth section. That fit too. Then 2 more names in the deaths section that meant nothing to Isaiah. And under the last death entry, in the same brown ink, 1 more line. Isaiah Foote Purnell, died October 12, 1994, age 58. Isaiah stopped breathing for a second. That was the current date. He had driven out here that morning, October 12, 1994. He was 58 years old. He looked at the entry again. Not a smudge, not a joke. Written in the same brown ink as the rest. In the same hand. Which meant it had been written a long time ago because that ink was old, and the paper had aged around the letters, and there was no way it had been written that morning. Somebody, sometime in the past, had written down the day of his death. And the day was that day. He closed the Bible. He sat down on the horsehair sofa in Miss Traver's front room. He put the Bible on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at the window. The window looked out on the front porch. The porch was empty. The road beyond was empty. The maples were turning. Everything was ordinary. He was, he told me later, a man who did not believe in ghosts. He did not believe in curses. He believed in the ordinary, explainable world. He had spent 35 years in the trade of dead people's belongings, and he had never once seen anything that could not be explained by ordinary means. He sat on that sofa a long time. He tried to think of an ordinary explanation. The best one he could come up with was this. Miss Traver, or somebody in her family, had known about his great-great-grandfather. Somebody had known the name. The name had been passed down, maybe, from some distant connection between the Travers and the Purnells that Isaiah did not know about. Somebody had, for some reason, written the name in the Bible along with a made-up birth date to make it look like an old entry. And somebody had at some point also written the death date using ink that they had aged somehow as a joke or a curse or a prophecy or a game. That was the ordinary explanation. He knew, sitting on the sofa, that it was not the true explanation, but it was the one he could work with. And a man in his position had to have an explanation to work with, or he would not have been able to stand up from the sofa. And he needed to stand up from the sofa because he had a house to clear, and daylight to use, and a truck to load, and if he sat on that sofa much longer, he would not stand up at all. He stood up. He put the Bible in his coat pocket. He did not put it in the box with the other books. He carried it with him for the rest of the day. He worked in Miss Traver's house until the sun went down. He loaded his truck with what he could carry. Books, dishes, the good side table, a set of wingback chairs that would sell well in his shop. He locked the house. He put the key back under the mat. He drove home. He did not die that day. The date on the Bible passed. 6 o'clock came. Sunset. Full dark. Isaiah was at his kitchen table eating a sandwich, and the date passed, and he did not die. Nothing happened. He almost laughed. He felt foolish for having taken it so seriously. He thought about the ordinary explanation. He thought, of course it was a game, somebody's cruel little game. He put the Bible on the kitchen counter. He finished his sandwich. He went to bed. He slept badly. He dreamed of the farmhouse. He dreamed of the horsehair sofa. He dreamed of the maples turning, and the empty road, and the porch. He dreamed that Miss Travers was sitting in the rocking chair with the crocheted afghan over her legs, and she was knitting the scarf that had been left half-finished in the basket, and she looked up at him with kind, pale eyes and said, "You came a little early, Isaiah. You came a little early. That's all right. We can wait." He woke at 4 a.m. He got out of bed. He went to the kitchen. He picked up the Bible off the counter. He sat at the kitchen table under the light. He opened it. The deaths section had been changed. The last entry, which had read, Isaiah Foote, Purnell, died October 12, 1994, was different now. The date had been altered, not scratched out, not written over. The ink itself had shifted on the page. October 12th had become October 23rd, in the same brown ink, in the same hand. As if it had always said the 23rd and he had misread it before, but he had not misread it. He had read it a dozen times. He had held the book on his lap in Miss Travers' front room and traced the letters with his finger. It had said the 12th, and it now said the 23rd. He sat at the kitchen table under the light, and he understood, or he began to understand. The book was not a prophecy. It was a schedule. And when he had not died on the 12th, the schedule had been amended, not by him, not by any hand he could see, by the book itself, or by whatever hand held the pen that wrote in it, which was not a hand available to Isaiah Foote Purnell. He turned the pages of the Bible, slow, careful. He was looking for what he did not know. There was writing throughout the book, not printed, handwritten. In the margins of the printed text, in the same brown ink, in the same careful old hand, there were notes. Some were short, some were long, some were in English, some were in what looked like Latin, some were in a language he could not identify. He read some of the English notes. In the margin, next to a passage in Genesis, someone had written, "The name is the man. Change the name, change the man. Keep the name, keep the man." In the margin next to a passage in Exodus, someone had written, 7 generations in the book. When the 8th is entered, the 1st is released. In the margin next to a passage in Ecclesiastes, someone had written, "There is no new thing under the sun. There is only the same thing wearing different names." In the margin next to a passage in the Gospels, someone had written, "He who is written cannot die. He who is unwritten cannot live." Isaiah closed the Bible. He sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up. Now, here is where the small things began. And I have to tell you, they came fast, faster than in the other stories I have told tonight, because I think whatever was in that Bible was not patient the way the things in the other stories were patient. It had waited 133 years to have its schedule fulfilled, and it was tired of waiting, and it was going to fulfill the schedule now, one way or another. The first small thing was the driver's license. Isaiah had to renew his driver's license that October. He had gotten a notice in the mail. He drove down to the county courthouse on the 14th. He filled out the form. He handed it to the clerk. The clerk typed his information into the computer. The clerk frowned. She said, "Sir, I've got a discrepancy here." He said, "What kind of discrepancy?" She said, "Our system has you as Isaiah Foote Purnell, born August 4th, 1861. He said, "That's not possible." She said, "I know. It's obviously an error. Somebody typed in the wrong year. Let me fix that." She typed. She frowned again. She said, "That's strange. It won't let me change it." He said, "Try again." She tried again. She said, "It's not taking the change. I'll have to get the supervisor." The supervisor came. The supervisor tried. The supervisor could not change it either. The supervisor apologized and said they would have to submit a form to the state to have the record corrected, and it would take 4 to 6 weeks. And in the meantime, his driver's license would show his correct birth year, but the state database would show 1861. The supervisor said, laughing a little uncomfortable, "You'd be 133 years old, sir. Isn't that something?" Isaiah did not laugh. He signed the form. He took his temporary license, and he left. The second small thing was the phone book. He got home. He sat in his kitchen. He picked up the new Palestine phone book. He looked up his own name. There were 2 Isaiah Foote Purnells listed. One at his own address on Miller Street. That was him. One at an address on Old Sawmill Pike. Route 2, the Traver farmhouse. He picked up the phone. He dialed the number for the second listing. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it was picked up. There was a moment of silence. Then a voice said, "Purnell Residence." The voice was his voice, not a voice that sounded like his. His voice, the same voice he had heard on his own answering machine when he had called himself once to check that it was working. His voice saying Purnell Residence in a tone of ordinary polite greeting. Isaiah said nothing. The voice said, "Hello." Isaiah, "Is that you?" Isaiah said, "Who is this?" The voice said, "You know who this is." Isaiah said, "No, I don't." The voice said, "Come out to the farm, Isaiah. Come out to the farm. We have things to discuss." Isaiah said, "I am not coming out there." The voice said, "You will. It's on the schedule." Then the voice hung up. The third small thing was the mirror. Isaiah went into his bathroom that night. He looked in the mirror. His face was there, his own face, familiar, 58 years old, gray in the beard, hair thinning at the crown. He looked closer. There was a small mark on his left cheekbone, a tiny brown spot, not a mole. He had not had it that morning. He had not had it for the 58 years of his life. He knew that spot. He had seen it in a photograph once, a photograph his father had kept in a small tin box in his desk drawer. A photograph of old Isaiah Purnell, taken sometime around 1890, when old Isaiah would have been about 29. The photograph had shown a young man with a beard and dark eyes, and a small brown spot on his left cheekbone. Isaiah touched the spot. It was warm. It felt like it had always been there. He turned away from the mirror. He turned back. The spot was slightly larger. The fourth small thing was his handwriting. He sat down at his kitchen table on the 15th of October to write out a check for his electric bill. He wrote the check. He signed his name at the bottom. The signature was not his. It was in his hand. The pen had moved the way his pen moved, but the shapes were different. The I of Isaiah was crossed at the top with a small serif he had never used. The F of Foote had a curling flourish that he had never used. The P of Purnell was tall and thin, with a loop at the top that he had never used. It was, he understood, an older signature, a 19th century signature, the signature, perhaps, of a man who had learned to write in the 1860s. He tried again. He got a new check. He signed slower, concentrating, trying to make the letters look the way they had always looked. The signature was the same, the old one. He could not make his hand write the modern one. He put down the pen. The fifth small thing was the dream. He dreamed that night that he was in a field, a wheat field. The wheat was cut and stacked in shocks. It was late afternoon. The light was low and gold. He was standing between two shocks of wheat, and he was holding a scythe, and his hands were young. His hands were the hands of a man of 29, strong, unmarked, brown from the sun. A woman was walking toward him across the field. She wore a long gray dress and a white apron. She was young. She was beautiful in the plain, grave way of 19th century farm women. She was smiling. She said, "Isaiah, come home. Supper's on." He said in a voice that was not his voice, but that came out of his mouth, "I'll be right along." She said, "Don't be late." He said, "I won't." She turned and walked back across the field. He watched her go. He raised the scythe. He turned back to the wheat. And as he turned, he saw at the edge of the field, standing under an oak tree, another man. A man in modern clothes. A man with gray in his beard and thinning hair. A man of 58. The other man was watching him. The other man raised a hand. In the dream, Isaiah understood that the other man was himself, and that the other man was fading, and that with each swing of the scythe, the other man would fade a little more, until, at the last swing, the other man would be gone, and there would only be the young man in the field, and the wheat, and the woman in the apron waiting on the porch. He woke. It was 3 a.m. He was in his bed on Miller Street. The house was quiet. Everything was ordinary. He got up. He went to the kitchen. He opened the Bible. The death date had changed again. October 23rd had become October 31st. He was being given time. He was being given time to come to it on his own. He understood that if he went out to the farmhouse, it would happen faster. And he understood that if he did not go, it would happen anyway, but slower and worse, because his body and his life would be taken from him piece by piece. His signature, his face, his name in the county records, his birth date in the state database. The Bible was rewriting him. It had already begun. He thought about running. He thought about it seriously. He was 58. He had money in the bank. He had a truck. He could load the truck and drive. He could drive to Florida, to Arizona, to Alaska. He could take a new name. He could disappear. But then he thought about the note in the margin of the Bible. The name is the man. Change the name, change the man. Keep the name, keep the man. And he understood that if he changed his name, the man who was Isaiah Foote Purnell would cease to exist, and that whatever new man he became would not remember what he had run from, and that the Bible would find him anyway through the name, because the name was on file in 100 places: state databases, federal records, old school yearbooks, church rolls, deeds, contracts. The name was in the world, and the name could not be fully erased, and where the name was, the schedule would find him. He also thought about burning the book. He thought about that for a long time. He held the book over the kitchen sink with a box of matches in his other hand. He struck a match. He held it under the corner of the cover. The match went out. He struck another. It went out. He struck a third. It went out. He filled the sink with lighter fluid. He soaked the book. He struck a match. The lighter fluid did not catch. He put the book in the oven. He turned the oven to 500 degrees. He waited an hour. He opened the oven. The book was untouched. The pages were cool. The leather was cool. The ink was not smudged. He understood then that he was not going to destroy the book. He sat at the kitchen table. He was very tired. He had not slept properly in days. His face in the small brown spot ached faintly. His signature no longer looked like his. He picked up the phone. He dialed the number for the Traver farmhouse. It rang once. His own voice answered. It said, "Come out, Isaiah. It's time." He said, "All right." He hung up. He drove out to Old Sawmill Pike. It was late afternoon on the 31st of October, Halloween. The maples were past their peak. The leaves were falling. The road was empty. The gravel drive up to the farmhouse crunched under his tires the way gravel drives always crunched, and everything was so ordinary that he almost turned around. He did not turn around. He parked in front of the house. He got out. He climbed the porch steps. The door was open. The house was quiet. He went in. The front room was as he had left it 3 weeks before. Horsehair sofa, wing-back chairs, cherry side table, bookshelf, half empty now, because he had taken most of the books. Miss Traver was in the rocking chair. She was there, and she was not there. She was a shape more than a person. A woman in a rocking chair with a crocheted afghan over her legs, knitting a scarf with 2 wooden needles. Her face was pale. Her hair was pale. Her eyes were kind. She said, "You came, Isaiah. I'm glad." He said, "You know me." She said, "I have known you a long time." He said, "Who are you?" She said, "I was the keeper of the book. I kept it 40 years after Silas died. Before me, my aunt kept it. Before her, her mother. Before her, back and back and back. We have kept the book since 1861. When it was first written, he said, 'Who wrote it?' She said, 'Your great-great-grandfather, when he made his covenant.' He said, 'What covenant?' She said, 'Sit down, Isaiah. I'll tell you.' He sat down on the horsehair sofa. She said, 'In 1861, your great-great-grandfather was 30 years old. He had a farm 2 miles from this one. He had a wife. He had 2 small children. The war had come, and the war had taken his brother and was going to take him. He did not want to go. He had a fear of dying that was greater than most men's, and he prayed for a way out of the war. And one night, in the summer of 1861, a man came to his door. The man was well dressed. He carried a book. He said he had heard the prayer. He said he could offer a bargain. The bargain was this: Isaiah Foote Purnell could avoid the war. He could live a long life. He could father children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and his line would continue. In exchange, his name would be written in the book, and every 7th generation, or when the schedule required it, a Purnell bearing the same name would come to a farmhouse at an appointed time and take the place of the previous one. The previous one would return to youth. The previous one would go back to 1861, to the farm, to the wife, to the children, and live the life he had wanted to live, unmarked by war. The new one would take his place in the world of the current time. The new one would age. The new one would eventually, in his turn, come to a farmhouse and be replaced and go back. She said, "Your great-great-grandfather agreed. He signed the book. He lived to be 72 years old. He died in 1933. He said, but that is only 133 years. You said 7 generations. She said, you are the 7th. He was the first. You are the 7th Isaiah Foote Purnell. There have been 6 before you. Each has come here. Each has been replaced. The one before you was a man named Isaiah who lived in Cincinnati in the 1920s, and he came here on a night in October in 1928. And he sat where you are sitting. And I was younger then, a girl of about 30. And I explained to him what I am explaining to you. He said, but your name is Traver. She said, my name is many things, Isaiah. I have kept the book. The book keeps me. She said, you are the last of the 7. When you sign, the covenant will be complete. Your great-great-grandfather will be released. He will die at last in his bed in 1861, having lived his one long life, and you will go back and take his place, not as him, as you. You will be 29 years old. You will have his farm and his wife and his children, but you will remember your own life and you will live his out. That is the deal. He said, and the man in the phone, the man who spoke in my voice. She said, that is the one who came before you. He has been waiting. He came here in 1928. He has been on the farm since. He is old now. He is very tired. He is ready to go home. He said, home. She said, to the 1861 farm. As your great-great-grandfather. When you take his place here in this century, he will take his place there. And your great-great-grandfather at last will be free. He said, and me? What of me? She said, you will be young again. You will have a wife who loves you. You will have children. You will have a farm. You will have a long life, Isaiah, longer than the one you have had here. That is the deal your great-great-grandfather made. It has held for 133 years. He said, and if I refuse? She said, you cannot refuse. The book has written you. If you refuse, you will simply cease. The name is the man. If the name is unwritten from this century, the man of this century unwrites also. You will not die. You will not have lived. There will only have been the other Isaiah on the farm, and no one in New Palestine, no shop on the square, no house on Miller Street. The world will smooth over the place where you were, and no one will remember there was ever a Purnell shop, and no one will remember you at all. He sat on the sofa. He thought. He thought about his shop, about the shoe repair next door, about the barber, about the courthouse square with its little bandstand where the town had concerts in summer, about his kitchen and his coffee pot and his old dog Beulah, who had died 3 years ago and whose collar still hung on the peg by the door, about Louetta Bishop, who had left him in 1969 and whom he had not seen in 25 years, and who lived now, he had heard, in Cleveland, with a husband and grandchildren, and who was a stranger to him now, but who was in the world. He thought about the world. He thought about being 29 again in a wheat field with a wife on the porch calling him to supper. He thought about how tired he was. He said, all right. Miss Travers smiled. She stood up from the rocking chair. She was younger than she had been a moment ago. Her hair was darker. Her face was smoother. She said, come to the table, Isaiah. She led him into the dining room. On the dining room table was the Bible, open to the family record, to the death section. There was a pen beside it, an old pen, a dip pen with a steel nib and a small bottle of brown ink. She said, sign under your entry. He picked up the pen. He dipped it in the ink. He looked at the entry. Isaiah Foote Purnell, died October 31st, 1994, age 58. He signed his name under it. The signature came out in the old hand, the tall, thin P, the looped I, the flourishing F. The ink dried instantly. The house shifted, not violently, softly, the way a house shifts when the temperature changes. There was a settling sound, a creaking of boards, a distant sigh. Miss Travers said, it is done. He said, now what? She said, now you go outside, walk to the barn. Behind the barn is the wheat field. Walk across the field. When you reach the other side, you will be there. He said, where? She said, home. He went outside. The sun was setting. The sky was gold and rose. The maples along the drive were burning with color. The barn was 50 yards from the house, and he walked to it slow because his legs were tired and his heart was full of something he could not name. He walked around the barn. Behind the barn was the wheat field. It should not have been there. It was late October, and the fields around New Palestine had been cut and plowed. But this field was full of standing wheat, golden, late afternoon light on it, shocks stacked here and there. He stepped into the field. The wheat came up to his waist. He walked slow. He felt the wheat brush against his hands. He felt the sun on his face, though the sun had been going down when he entered the field, and it seemed to be rising again now, and the light was different, and the air was warmer. He walked halfway across the field. He stopped. He looked at his hands. His hands were younger. The veins were gone. The liver spots were gone. The skin was brown from the sun and unmarked. He kept walking. By the time he reached the far side of the field, he was 29 years old. His beard was full and dark. His back was straight. His breath was easy. There was a farmhouse on the far side, a small white house with a green door. A woman was on the porch. She wore a long gray dress and a white apron. She was smiling. She raised her hand to him. She said, "Isaiah, supper's on. Come home." He walked toward the house. His steps were light. He was smiling too. He did not remember quite why he was smiling. There was a shape at the edge of his mind. Something about a shop and a square and a name written in a book. But the shape was fading. The wheat field was behind him now. The house was in front of him. The woman was waiting. He walked up the porch steps. He kissed her cheek. She smelled of soap and bread. He said, "I was thinking of you all day." She said, "You always are." They went in to supper. Now here is what happened in New Palestine. The next morning, November 1st, 1994, the sun rose on a town that was one shop front shorter than it had been the day before. Between the barber and the shoe repair on the courthouse square, there was now an empty lot with a "for sale" sign on it. The sign was old and weathered. It looked as if it had stood there for years. The house on Miller Street was gone. In its place was a small vacant lot with a low stone wall around it. Neighbors did not remark on it, because it had always been a small vacant lot. It had never been anything else. Louetta Bishop in Cleveland woke that morning and had a strange feeling all day that she was forgetting something. She could not put her finger on it. By evening, the feeling had passed. The county records had no entry for an Isaiah Foote Purnell born in 1936. The state records had no such entry. The federal records had no such entry. But in a small farmhouse on Old Sawmill Pike, in an upstairs bedroom, an old man lay in a bed. He was very thin. He was very tired. He was smiling. He had been waiting a long time. He said softly, to no one in the room, "I'm going home now." And then he closed his eyes and was gone. And in a wheat field in 1861, a young farmer walked in from the fields to a small white house, and his wife met him at the door, and he kissed her cheek, and they had supper, and he lived out his life on that farm, and he had 2 more children, and he died in 1933 at the age of 72 in his bed with his wife beside him. And in his last moment he thought, briefly, of a place he had almost been, a town square with a bandstand, a shop between a barber and a shoe repair, a house on a street called Miller. He could not quite remember why he was thinking of it. Then he did not remember it at all. And the book in the farmhouse on Old Sawmill Pike closed itself, and the pen was set down beside it, and the woman who had kept it, whose name had been Miss Trevor and had been other things before, sat down in the rocking chair in the front room and picked up her knitting and continued the scarf from where it had been left and settled in to wait. 7 generations from now. For the next Isaiah, for the next one to come walking up the drive. I bought that Bible, friend. I bought it at an estate auction in the winter of 1995, in a lot from a farmhouse on Old Sawmill Pike, from a nephew in Columbus who did not want it. I did not open it for 2 years. When I did open it, the family record was blank. Every name had faded from the page. The deaths, the marriages, the births, all gone. The paper was clean, but there was one thing written on the flyleaf, in a careful old hand, in brown ink gone almost to sepia. It said, "Your name goes here. I have not written in it. I keep it on a high shelf. I look at it once a year on the 31st of October. The flyleaf is still blank. But every year the invitation is a little more legible, and every year I am a little older, and every year I wonder how many generations there are, really, and whether the 7 were only the beginning, and whether every family, if you go back far enough, has a book somewhere, and a covenant, and a schedule. I don't know, friend. I try not to think about it, but some nights, when the wind is right, I think I hear wheat rustling, even here in the mountains where no wheat grows, and I think I hear a woman on a porch calling a name that is almost mine, almost, not quite, not yet. Story 6. I heard this told at a diner in Kentucky one October. The teller wouldn't give his name. He was a thin man of about 60, with hands that shook when he lifted his coffee cup, and he told it to me across a booth at 3 in the morning while a rain came down outside so hard it drowned out the jukebox. And by the time he was done, the rain had stopped and the sun was coming up, and he was gone, and the waitress said she'd never seen him before and never saw him again. Now listen close. This is how he told it, and I have kept his words as close as I can, though I have smoothed some of them out for the telling. The story concerns a woman named Clarice Odell Whitfield, who was a night nurse at a small nursing home in western Kentucky in the winter of 1983. The nursing home was called the Willow Creek Home for the Aged. It sat on a bend in a 2-lane county highway, about 8 miles outside a town called Sedge Hollow, and it had 31 residents and a staff of 12, and it had been built in 1952 on the site of an older building that had burned down in 1949 and taken 11 old people with it. That fire was not something the staff talked about, but it was mentioned once a year on the anniversary when the director would send a quiet note around asking the night shift to be extra attentive on the 14th of December, just in case, the note said. Residents get restless on anniversaries. It was the kind of thing a director wrote when he did not want to say what he really meant. Clarice Whitfield was 41 years old that winter. She was a big-boned woman with steady hands and a slow, patient way of speaking to the residents, and she had been at Willow Creek 9 years. She worked the 3rd shift, which ran from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, alongside one other nurse and one orderly. 3 staff for 31 residents, most of whom slept, most of whom needed nothing, most nights. She had grown up in Sedge Hollow. Her mother had been a laundress at the old building, the one that burned, Her mother had been off that night in December of '49, which was the only reason Clarice had been born at all, because her mother had been carrying her at the time and would not go back to work at the new building when it opened 3 years later. Her mother had told her, when Clarice took the job at Willow Creek in 1974, "You be careful in that place, girl. Don't matter that they built it new. The ground remembers." Clarice had taken that as country talk and put it aside. The 14th of December, 1983, was a Wednesday. It was cold. It had snowed the day before, and the snow was still on the ground, patchy on the fields and thick in the shadow of the willow trees along the creek that gave the home its name. The moon was near full. The sky was clear. It was the kind of winter night in western Kentucky, where the air feels thin and every sound carries too far. Clarice came on shift at 10:45. She hung her coat in the staff room. She checked the logbook. She read the notes from the second shift. The other nurse on with her that night was a young woman named Aletha Gaines, 23, who had only been at the home 8 months. The orderly was a big, quiet man named Rufus Pert, who had been there almost as long as Clarice. At 11 o'clock, the second shift went home. The building settled into its night quiet, the kind of quiet a nursing home makes at night, which is not really quiet because there are always sounds. Ventilators, oxygen concentrators, the soft click of a heart monitor down the hall, the distant snore of Mr. Paget in room 14, the creak of the floorboards as Rufus made his rounds. Clarice began her own rounds at 11:30. She walked the east wing first. She checked on each resident. Sleeping, sleeping, sleeping. Mrs. Ivins in room 7 awake and asking for water. Mr. Kilbride in room 9 calling out in his sleep. She gave Mrs. Ivins her water. She checked Mr. Kilbride's chart and confirmed he was on a mild sedative and would settle. She moved on. Now, here is the first small thing, and I want you to pay attention to it, because it is the kind of thing a person can miss if they are not paying attention, and Clarice was tired, and she almost missed it. At the end of the east wing, past the last residence room, there is a door. The door goes to a small storage closet. Linens, extra, pillowcases, a few boxes of adult diapers, that kind of thing. The door was always kept closed but not locked because there was nothing in there worth locking up. The door was open, not wide, about 6 inches, just enough for Clarice to see a slice of the dark inside. She thought at first that Aletha had been in there and left it open. But Aletha had come on shift at the same time she had, and Aletha had been sitting at the nurse's station when Clarice started her rounds. So it had to have been the second shift who left it open. She walked to the door. She was going to close it. She put her hand on the knob. The knob was warm, not the temperature of the hallway. Warmer. Warm the way a doorknob is warm when a hand has just been on it. She stood there a second. She listened. There was no sound from inside the closet. She opened the door wider. She looked in. She flipped the light switch. The closet was empty. Linens on the shelves, pillowcases stacked neat, boxes of supplies. Nothing that shouldn't be there. But there was a smell. Faint, not unpleasant. Something like burning cotton. Something like the way a bedsheet smells when it has been left too close to an iron. She closed the door. She wrote in her rounds book, storage closet ajar, closed at 23:47. She kept walking. She finished the east wing. She started the west wing. The west wing was the same as the east wing. Sleeping, sleeping, sleeping. Mrs. Callender in room 22 coughing in her sleep. Mr. Voskyle in 24 muttering something Clarice did not catch. She checked on both. She moved on. She reached the end of the west wing at 12:15. She turned to walk back toward the nurse's station. That is when she saw the woman in the hallway. She was standing about halfway down the west wing, near the door to room 20. She was an old woman, small, thin, wearing a long white nightgown that came to her ankles. Her hair was white and loose around her shoulders. Her feet were bare. She was standing very still, facing the wall between rooms 20 and 21, and she seemed to be looking at something on the wall that Clarice could not see from her end of the hallway. Clarice thought, at first, that it was Mrs. Sutter from room 20. Mrs. Sutter had a habit of wandering. She had gotten out of her room 3 times in the past month, and each time they had found her in a different hallway, looking at the walls. Alzheimer's, sundown syndrome. It was not unusual. Clarice walked toward her. She kept her step slow and soft. She said in her calm night nurse voice, "Mrs. Sutter, it's Clarice. Let me help you back to bed." The woman did not turn. Clarice got closer. 10 feet, 8 feet, 6. She stopped. The woman was not Mrs. Sutter. Mrs. Sutter was a heavy-set woman with short gray hair and a face like a pudding. The woman in the hallway was thin. Her hair was long and white. And now that Clarice was closer, she could see that the nightgown the woman was wearing was not a nursing home nightgown. It was too long. It was too old-fashioned. It had a small pattern of flowers stitched around the collar and the cuffs. The kind of nightgown a woman would have worn in the 1940s, maybe, before nursing homes started dressing everybody in the same pale blue. Clarice said, softer, "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman turned her head, slow, very slow, like a doll on a mechanism. Her face was old, but her eyes were not the eyes of an old woman with a confused mind. Her eyes were clear, sharp, focused, and they were looking at Clarice as if Clarice were the one who did not belong in the hallway. The woman said, "You are new." Clarice said, "No, ma'am. I worked here 9 years." The woman said, "Not to the shift, to the 14th. Clarice said, "I don't understand." The woman said, "You have never worked the 14th of December before." Clarice thought about it. She had worked at Willow Creek 9 years. She counted back. In 1974, she had started on the day shift. She had moved to the 3rd shift in 76. She had worked every 14th of December since 76, 7 of them, and she was about to say so. Then she remembered, 1978, she had been off with pneumonia that week. 1979, she had switched with Vera Cottrell to take her sister's wedding. 1980, she had been off with the flu. 1981, her mother had died on the 10th, and she had taken bereavement through the 20th. 1982, she had traded shifts with Vera again to take her nephew to the hospital. She had, in fact, never worked the 14th of December on the 3rd shift, not once, in 9 years. She said quietly, "How did you know that?" The woman said, "We know who is here on the 14th. We have to know. We are counting." Clarice said, "Counting what?" The woman said, "Counting who stays." Then the woman turned her head back to the wall, slow, on the mechanism. She resumed looking at the wall between rooms 20 and 21. Clarice took another step. She looked at the wall. It was a normal wall, painted the pale institutional yellow of the whole west wing. There was nothing on it. No mark, no smudge, no picture, nothing. She said, "What are you looking at?" The woman said, "The door." Clarice said, "There is no door there." The woman said, "There was. In the old building, there was a door to the small parlor. It was where we sat in the evenings, where we listened to the radio, where we were, most of us, on the night of the fire." Clarice felt her back go cold. She said, "You were in the old building." The woman said, "Yes." Clarice said, "You are one of the 11." The woman said, "I am." Now, Clarice was not a woman who spooked easy. She had worked 9 years of night shifts. She had seen residents die in their beds. She had held the hand of old man Vincent while he passed. She had cleaned up things that would turn a strong stomach. She was not afraid of quiet, and she was not afraid of the dead, because she believed, in the way of country people, that the dead were mostly harmless if you were respectful. But she was afraid now. She said, "Ma'am, would you like me to walk you back somewhere?" The woman said, "No. I am where I am supposed to be." She said, "Are you here to walk them back?" Clarice said, "Walk who back?" The woman said, "The others, the ones who are supposed to come with us." Clarice said, "I don't know what you mean." The woman said, "On the 14th, we come back. All 11. We stand in the halls. We look for the ones who are ready. We take them with us. It is the way the fire never quite finished. We are still counting, you see. We come one short, we come one short, we come one short. Each year we take one to make it right. Each year we are still one short." She said, 11 died, but we were 12. She said, "One of us got out." Clarice said, "Who?" The woman said, "The night nurse. She ran out of the small parlor when the fire started. She did not turn back. She left the door open behind her, and the fire came in fast. 11 of us did not get out. She got out. She lived. She was 24 years old that year, and she lived to be old, and she died in her own bed in 1979 at the age of 54 of a heart attack in a house on Cutbank Road. She said, "We could not take her. She did not come back to the building. We tried. We waited every 14th. She never came. She died out of our reach." She said, her daughter, though. She said her daughter took a job at the new building in 1974. She said her daughter has never worked the 14th of December before. Clarice could not move. The woman turned her head again on the mechanism. She looked at Clarice with her clear, sharp eyes. She said, "Clarice Odell Whitfield." She said, "Your mother was Ruby Odell." She said, "Your mother left us in the fire." She said, "We have been waiting." Now here is where the small things came fast, one on top of the other, and I have to tell them to you as they came. The lights in the west wing flickered, not out, just a dip. The way lights dip when a big appliance kicks on somewhere. The smell that had been in the closet was in the hallway now. Burning cotton, faint, getting stronger. Clarice looked back toward the nurse's station. The station was far, 100 feet maybe. The hallway between her and it was suddenly full of shapes. 10 of them, old people in old-fashioned night clothes, men and women, standing in the hallway between her and the station, not moving, facing her. Their hair was white. Their feet were bare. Their eyes, all of them, were the same clear, sharp, focused eyes as the woman's. They had not been there a moment ago. The woman in front of her said, "Come with us, Clarice. Your mother owed us. We are only taking what we were owed." Clarice said, "Please." The woman said, "It will not hurt." The woman said, "You will not be alone. There will be 11 of us and you." It will be 12. It will be right at last. We have waited 34 years for the count to be right. Clarice said, Where is Aletha? Where is Rufus? The woman said, They are not on the list. They are safe. Only you. Clarice took a step back. The 10 in the hallway took a step forward. The woman in front of her raised her hand. It was a small hand, thin, veined. She reached toward Clarice's cheek. Clarice said, No. She said it loud, louder than she had meant to. It came out almost as a shout, and it echoed down the hallway, and the 10 shapes flinched. Just a little, just enough for Clarice to see that they could be startled. She said again, louder, No, I am not my mother. I did not leave you. I was not there. You cannot take me for what she did. The woman lowered her hand. She said, That is not how it works. Clarice said, Then tell me how it works. Tell me, proper. I am owed that much. The woman looked at her a long moment. Then she said, All right, I will tell you. She said, The debt goes down the blood. The nurse who left us had a daughter. The daughter had you. If the daughter had come back to the building, the daughter would have paid. She did not come back. She stayed away. She was clever, so the debt went to you. She said, But there is a rule. There is always a rule. She said, The debt can only be collected from someone who comes to the building on the 14th of December, not any other day, not any other date, only the 14th, only if you are here, only if you have come of your own will. She said, Your mother knew this. That is why she made you promise never to work the 14th. Clarice thought back. Her mother had made her promise many things about the job. Be kind to the old people. Don't take shortcuts. Wash your hands. Keep the linens clean. And yes, she remembered now. One specific thing. Her mother had said, Clarice, don't ever work the night of December 14th. Trade shifts. Take a vacation. Get sick. Just don't be there. She had promised. And for 7 years, she had kept the promise without thinking about it. Small things had always come up around that date. Vera had always been willing to trade. It had been easy. This year had been different. Vera had retired in October. The new nurse who had replaced her, Aletha, had said, when the schedule came out, that she did not mind working the 14th, that she had no plans, that she was new and wanted to prove herself. And Clarice, without thinking about it, had said, All right, I'll be there too. It'll be quiet. She had broken her mother's rule without meaning to, without remembering. The woman in front of her seemed to see the understanding come into Clarice's face. The woman said, Yes. She said, You came. So the debt can be collected? Clarice said, But I did not know. The woman said, That does not matter. Ignorance is not a defense. Your mother knew. She had a duty to tell you. She did not tell you clearly enough. She told you and hoped you would obey without understanding. That was her sin. It has become your debt. Clarice thought fast. She thought about running. But the 10 were between her and the nurse's station. And she did not know if they could move. She did not know how fast. She thought about screaming. But she did not know if Aletha or Rufus would hear, and she did not know if the 10 would let them come. And she did not want to bring them into this if she could help it. She thought about arguing. She said, I have a rule, too. The woman said, What rule? Clarice said, In the old building, on the night of the fire, 11 died, 1 got out. That is the count. That is the tally. If you take me, you will be 12. That is not right either. It is not 11, and it is not the 12 you should have been. It is a different 12. It does not make you whole. The woman was silent. Clarice said, You have been telling yourself that taking a life every year makes the count right. but the count is not right. The count has been wrong every year you have taken someone. You are not 11 and 1 anymore. You are 11 and 34. You are the 11 and 34 other souls you have carried off in the meantime. She said, "You want the count to be right. Then let the count stay at 11. Let the one who got out stay out. My mother is dead. She is out of your reach. Let it end there. Let the 12 be 11 and 1 forever, the way it was on the night of the fire." The woman was silent a long time. The 10 in the hallway did not move. Then the woman said, "You are clever, Clarice Odell Whitfield." She said, "You are your mother's daughter." She said, "Nobody has argued with us before. Nobody has stood in the hallway and made the case. They have always come with us. They have always been too frightened to speak." She said, "Let me confer." She turned. She walked, silent, bare feet on the tile, down the hallway. She joined the 10. They stood together in a small circle. They did not speak, or if they spoke, Clarice could not hear it. She could see only their heads bowing slightly and turning and bowing again. Clarice stood alone at the end of the hallway. She was shaking. Her hands were cold. She could feel the smell of burning cotton in her nose. After what felt like a long time but was probably only a minute, the woman came back. She said, "We have decided." She said, "We will accept your argument on one condition." Clarice said, "What condition?" The woman said, "You must never come to this building again on the 14th of December. Not next year, not the year after, not ever. If you set foot in this building on that date, the argument is void, and we come for you, and there will be no more discussion." Clarice said, "I accept." The woman said, "And there is one more thing." Clarice said, "What?" The woman said, "You must tell your daughter." Clarice said, "I do not have a daughter." The woman said, "You will." "In 3 years." Clarice said, "No. I am 41. I have no husband. I have no plans." The woman smiled, just a little. It was a small, tired smile, and there was pity in it, and there was knowledge in it that Clarice did not have. The woman said, "You will have a daughter in 3 years. Her name will be Ruth. She will grow up. She may one day wish to become a nurse. If she does, you must tell her the rule. You must tell her plain, not hint, not hope. Tell her." She said, "If she works this building on the 14th, we will come for her. Because the debt is still there. We have only agreed to leave you alone. We have not forgiven the debt. It stays on the blood. It will always stay on the blood." Clarice said, "I will tell her." The woman said, "Swear it." Clarice said, "I swear." The woman nodded. Then she and the 10 others faded, not vanished, faded, like a photograph going into water. The hallway was empty. The smell of burning cotton was gone. The lights were steady. Clarice stood alone. She walked back to the nurse's station on legs that would barely hold her. Aletha was at the desk reading a magazine. Aletha looked up and said, "You look like you saw a ghost." Clarice said, "I'm fine. Just a long walk." Aletha said, "You want coffee?" Clarice said, "Please." She sat down at the desk. She wrote in her rounds book. She wrote, "All West Wing residents accounted for and sleeping." She did not write about the woman. She did not write about the 10. She did not write about anything else at all. She finished her shift. She went home at 7 in the morning. She slept until 3 in the afternoon. She got up. She called the director. She said she was resigning. The director asked why. She said, "Personal reasons." She never went back to Willow Creek. She got a job in a hospital in Sedge Hollow. Days only. She worked there 20 more years and retired. 3 years after that night, in 1986, at the age of 44, Clarice Odell Whitfield gave birth to a daughter. She had not planned to. She had met a widower named Emmett Vance at a church supper. They had married quiet, and the daughter came, against every expectation, healthy and pink and squalling. She named the daughter Ruth. She told Ruth about the rule when Ruth was 12 years old. She sat her down at the kitchen table, and she told her plain about the fire, about the 11, about the debt, about the 14th of December, about the Willow Creek home for the aged. She said, "Ruth, you promised me, whatever you do with your life, whatever job you take, you do not set foot in that building on the 14th of December, not ever, not once." Ruth said, "Mama, is this a true story?" Clarice said, "It is true." Ruth promised. The Willow Creek home for the aged closed in 1998. It was torn down in 2001. A small strip mall was built on the site, a dollar store, a hair salon, a tax preparer. But the ground remembered. The strip mall has changed owners 4 times in the past 20 years. Businesses do not stay. Employees do not stay. There are, every December, small strange occurrences. A cash register that opens by itself. A light that flickers in a specific corner of the dollar store, always near the linen aisle. A smell of burning cotton that comes and goes. The man in the diner told me this. He said, "I know because my sister worked in the hair salon for 2 years. She quit in December of 2011. She would not say why." I said to him, "And you? How do you know all the rest?" He said, "I was Rufus Pert. I was the orderly on shift with Clarice that night. I saw her come back from the West Wing white as a sheet. She never told me what she saw. She did not have to. I knew. I had worked that hallway 9 years. I had seen things too. Not that year, but other years. On the 14th. I never worked the 14th again after that either." I said, "And Clarice?" He said, "She died in 2009. In a hospital in Sedge Hollow, old age." I said, "And Ruth?" He said, "Ruth is a nurse now. Works in Louisville. She has never set foot in that dollar store on the 14th of December. She never will." He looked at me across the booth. He said, "You are a storyteller. You go from town to town and you collect these things. I have told you this because it needs to be told. Because there are debts down there in the ground of every town, and the ground remembers, and sometimes the debts come due, and sometimes they can be argued with, and sometimes they cannot." He said, "You be careful which stories you carry, some of them attached to you." Then he paid for his coffee. He walked out into the last of the rain, and I sat in the booth as the sun came up, and I wrote down everything he had said, and I have kept it these many years. I do not know if he was Rufus Pert. I do not know if there was a Willow Creek home for the aged. I have never gone to Kentucky to check. I have decided I do not want to know. Some doors, friend, you do not open. Some closets you close, and you leave closed. And some hallways on some nights of the year you do not walk to the end of. Story 7. This story sat in my journal for 40 years before I understood it, and by then the man it happened to was long dead, and I could not go back and ask him the questions I wished I had asked. His name was Vernon Alistair Boaz, and he was a long-haul truck driver out of Amarillo, Texas. And what happened to him happened over 3 nights in the spring of 1966 on a stretch of road in the Texas Panhandle that, according to every map I have ever consulted, does not exist. Now listen close. I met Vernon in a truck stop in Oklahoma in 1967, a year after these events, and he told me the story over the course of a long night of coffee and cigarettes. And he told it slow, and he told it honest. And when he was done, he said to me, "I have not told anybody this. I am telling you because you are a stranger, and I will not see you again, and I need to tell somebody, or I will lose my mind." I said, "All right." I listened. I wrote it down that night in a small room at the same truck stop, in the front pages of the journal I kept in those years. Vernon died in 1969 of a heart attack at the wheel of his truck on a straight, flat stretch of highway in New Mexico. He was 46 years old. Here is what he told me. In the spring of 1966, Vernon was 43. He had been driving trucks since he came home from Korea in 53. 13 years of long hauls, mostly hauling cattle feed and farm equipment between Amarillo and points north and east. He drove a 1962 Peterbilt with a red cab and a sleeper compartment behind the seats. He knew every road in the Texas Panhandle the way a man knows the veins on the back of his own hand. He was married. His wife's name was Ada. They lived in a small house on the outskirts of Amarillo. They had no children, though they had wanted them. Ada worked at the telephone company as an operator. Vernon was on the road 3 weeks out of 4, and they had made their peace with that, the way trucking families do. The run that started this began on a Tuesday in April. Vernon left Amarillo at 4 in the morning with a load of tractor parts bound for a dealership in Guymon, Oklahoma. Guymon is about 130 miles from Amarillo, straight up through the Panhandle on Highway 287. A 3-hour run if the weather is good. It should have been a nothing trip. Half a day out, half a day back, home by supper. The weather was good when he left. Clear sky, cool air, a quarter moon setting in the west. He drove with the window cracked and the radio low, and he was in Dumas by 6. And past Dumas, the road opened up flat and empty, the way Panhandle roads do, with the sky enormous and the land pressed thin beneath it. Around 7 in the morning, about 10 miles south of Stratford, Vernon saw a road sign he had never seen before. He had driven that stretch of 287 maybe 200 times. He knew every sign, every mile marker, every cattle gate and windmill and grain elevator. He was, if he did say so himself, an attentive driver. And this sign was new. It was a Greene County Road sign, standard highway department issue, with white letters. It said Farm Road 716 and an arrow pointing east. Vernon slowed. He looked at the sign. He looked at the road it pointed to. There was a road there, a 2-lane blacktop, freshly paved, running east into the flatness. He did not remember a road there. He was certain there had not been a road there the last time he drove past 3 weeks ago. But roads got built sometimes. Highway departments paved things without much notice. He thought, well, they must have put that in recent. He drove on. He got to Guymon at 9. He unloaded. He ate lunch at a diner across the street from the dealership. He drove back south. At the same spot, 10 miles south of Stratford, he saw the sign again. Farm Road 716, arrow pointing east. He looked at the road as he passed it. The road was still there, fresh blacktop, running east into empty country. He kept driving. He got home to Ada that evening. He did not mention the road. It had not stuck in his mind hard enough to mention. The second time was 3 days later. Friday, another run to Guymon. Different load, same route. He drove up in the early morning. He passed the sign. Farm Road 716, Arrow East. This time, he took a longer look. The road was still there. It looked older now. The blacktop was a shade less fresh. There was some dust on it, blown up from the fields. He drove on. He delivered. He drove back. On the return trip in the late afternoon, he stopped at the intersection. He did not know why. He pulled his rig onto the shoulder just past the sign, and he got out and he walked back to the road. He stood at the intersection. He looked east down Farm Road 716. It ran straight, flat blacktop, 2 lanes, no shoulders, no lines painted yet. It ran east, across the empty flatland, and it kept running. And about a mile out, it dipped slightly. And about 2 miles out, he could see, faint against the horizon, a small dark shape that might have been a farmhouse. There was nothing else out there, no trees, no power lines, no windmills, no cattle, just the road and the shape at the end of it. He got back in his truck. He drove home. That night, at supper, he mentioned it to Ada. He said, "They've put in a new road up near Stratford. Farm Road 716 runs east from 287. I don't remember it being there before." Ada said, "That's nice, dear." She did not think anything of it. Why would she? Roads got built. Vernon did not think about it again for 2 weeks. He had runs to Kansas and back. He did not go through Stratford. When he finally did the Guymon run again, on the second Tuesday of May, he was thinking about other things, and he almost drove past the sign without noticing it. Almost. Something made him look. The sign was still there. Farm Road 716, Arrow East. But the road was different. It was older now. The blacktop was cracked in places. There were faded yellow lines painted down the middle. There was a stop sign at the intersection that he was certain had not been there before. And the stop sign looked old, rusted, the way stop signs look when they have stood in the panhandle sun for 20 years. And 2 miles out, the shape at the end of the road was clearer. It was a house, a small white house, 2 stories, a wraparound porch, a red tin roof. It looked from a distance exactly like the house he and Ada lived in on the outskirts of Amarillo. Vernon pulled over. He got out. He stood at the intersection a long time. The house at the end of the road looked, as best he could tell from 2 miles away, identical to his house. He did not drive down the road. He got in his truck and he drove to Guyman. He delivered his load. He drove back. When he passed the sign on the return trip, he did not look at it. He kept his eyes on 287 and he drove. He got home. Ada was in the kitchen. The house looked normal. Everything was normal. He did not mention the road. He did not sleep that night. Now here is where the small things began. And Vernon told me they came in waves, the way tide comes in. Not all at once, in sets. Some small, some larger, each one edging further up the shore. The first small thing was a piece of mail. 2 days after the second sighting, an envelope arrived in the mail at Vernon and Ada's house. It was addressed to Vernon. There was no return address. Inside was a small card. On the card, in careful handwriting, was written a single line. The line said, "Farm Road 716, 2 miles east. We have been expecting you." Vernon showed it to no one. He put it in his sock drawer. The second small thing was Ada. 3 days after the card came, Ada said to him at breakfast, "Vernon, I had the strangest dream last night. I dreamed I was in our house, but it was not our house. It was in a different place, Flat land all round it, no neighbors, just fields. And when I looked out the front window, there was a long road running west from the porch, and at the end of the road, way far off, there was a truck stopped. And a man was standing beside the truck looking at the house, and I could not see his face, but I knew it was you. And I waved to you, and you did not wave back. You just stood there looking, and then I woke up. Vernon said, "That is a strange dream." Ada said, "It felt real, Vernon. It felt like I have had it before." Do you think a person can have the same dream more than once and only remember it the second time? Vernon said, "I don't know." He went to work. The third small thing was the sign. Vernon did the Guymon run again the following Friday. He drove north. He knew, as he drove, that he was going to look at the sign. He was not going to stop. He was going to look and drive past. He looked. The sign was different. It still said Farm Road 716. It still had an arrow pointing east. But underneath the road name, in smaller letters, was a new line. The line said, Boaz Residence, 2 miles. Vernon did not stop. He drove on. His hands on the steering wheel were shaking. He gripped it hard until his knuckles went white. And he drove to Guymon, and he delivered his load, and he did not remember later delivering it. He had no memory of the unloading. He came back to himself sitting in a diner in Guymon with a cup of coffee in front of him that he did not remember ordering. He drove home. He did not look at the sign on the way back. He got home. Ada was in the kitchen. He walked in. He sat down at the table. He said, "Ada." She said, "What is it, Vernon?" He said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight." She said, "All right." He said, "Have you ever heard of Farm Road 716? She looked at him a long time. She said, "Vernon, why are you asking me that?" He said, "Just answer." She said, "Yes, I have heard of it." He said, "When?" She said, "In the dreams. That road is in the dreams. It runs west from the porch of the house I dream I am in." I have never told you the name of the road. I only knew the name of the road because I saw it on a sign in one of the dreams. Farm Road 716. That was the name. Vernon said, "When did the dream start?" She said, "About a month ago. Maybe a little more. Around the time you first told me they had built a new road up near Stratford." Vernon put his head in his hands. He said, "Ada, I have to tell you something." He told her about the sign, the new line, Boaz Residence, 2 miles. She listened. Her face went pale. When he was done, she said, "Vernon, are we going crazy?" He said, "I don't know." She said, "What are we going to do?" He said, "I don't know." They sat at the kitchen table a long time. Now here is where the fourth small thing came, and it was not small, and it came fast. And Vernon told me that it was the moment when he understood, finally, that whatever was happening to him was not going to stop until he did something about it. That night, at about 3 a.m, the phone rang. Vernon got up. He walked to the phone in the hallway. He picked it up. He said, "Hello." There was silence on the other end. Then a voice. The voice was his own voice. It said, "Vernon, come home." He said, "Who is this?" The voice said, "You know who this is. Come home. Take 287 north. Turn east at the sign. Come home. Ada is waiting." Vernon said, "Ada is asleep in the bedroom." The voice said, "No, Ada is here. Ada has been here a long time. The Ada in the bedroom is not the right Ada. She is very close. She is almost right, but she is not the one. The right Ada is here. She has been waiting for you to notice." Vernon said, "Who are you?" The voice said, "I am the man who lives at Farm Road 716. I am the man who has been waiting for you to come home. I have your life. I have your wife. I have your house. I have everything you have. But I have had it longer than you have. Yours is a copy. Mine is the original." Vernon said, "That is not possible." The voice said, "Come out to the road. Look at the house. It is your house. Every detail. The red tin roof, the wraparound porch, the rocking chair on the east side, the nail sticking up out of the third step where I always meant to hammer it down. It is your house, because it is my house, and your house is the copy." The voice said, "You have been living my life. You have been doing it well enough. But the accounts are getting checked. The books are being balanced. You have to come home. There is not room for two of us. There is not room for two Adas. Something has to give." Vernon said, "What if I don't come?" The voice said, "Then I will come to you." The voice hung up. Vernon stood in the hallway with the phone in his hand. The dial tone hummed. He put the phone down. He walked to the bedroom. Ada was in the bed. She was breathing slow and even. He looked at her for a long time. Her hair on the pillow, the freckle on her right ear, the little scar on her chin from where she fell off a bicycle when she was 12. Every detail he knew of her. She was Ada. He was sure of it. He went to the kitchen. He sat at the table. He waited for morning. Now here is what Vernon Boaz did, and I have thought about it many times since he told me, and I still do not know if it was the right thing or the wrong thing, but it was the thing he did. He drove out to Farm Road 716 the next morning. He did not tell Ada. He kissed her on the forehead before she woke, and he got in his truck, and he drove up 287, and he came to the sign. The sign was different again. Now the second line read, Boaz Residence, 1 mile. The road had gotten shorter. He turned east. He drove down Farm Road 716 at 20 miles an hour. The blacktop hummed under his tires. The land stretched flat on either side, and there were no fields planted, and there were no fence lines, and there were no animals, and there was only the road and the sky and the shape growing larger ahead of him. At what should have been 1 mile, he came to a stop sign. It said, "Stop." He stopped. Beyond the stop sign was his house. Exactly his house. The white clapboard, the red tin roof, the wraparound porch, the rocking chair on the east side, the screen door that hung a little crooked because the top hinge had loosened last summer, and he had not gotten around to fixing it. There was a truck in the drive. It was his truck, his 1962 Peterbilt, red cab, same one he was sitting in. 2 of them. There was a man on the porch. The man was sitting in the rocking chair. He was drinking a cup of coffee. He was wearing Vernon's clothes. He raised his cup in a small greeting. Vernon got out of his truck. He walked toward the house. The porch boards creaked under his feet the way porch boards creaked at home. There was, in the third step, a nail sticking up 1/2 inch, the same nail he had been meaning to hammer down for 6 months. The man in the chair said, "Vernon, you came. I appreciate that. Not everyone does." Vernon said, "Who are you?" The man said, "You know who I am. I am the man from the phone. I live here. I have lived here since 1948. Ada is inside. She is making bread. You can smell it. Vernon could smell it. Bread baking. Ada's bread." He knew the smell. The man said, "Come sit down. Have some coffee. We should talk." Vernon sat down in the other rocking chair, the one he sat in at home in the mornings before shifts. It creaked the way the chair at home creaked. The man handed him a cup of coffee. Vernon took it. He did not drink it. The man said, I will explain. I will explain to you the way it was explained to me in 1948 when I came home from Korea. Vernon said, "You did not come home from Korea in 1948. Korea was 50 to 53. The man smiled. He said, "In my Korea, it was 45 to 48. Everything is a little different here. That is the point. This road, this house, this Ada, everything is a version, not quite the version you have. Adjacent." He said, "You are living in an adjacent version too. There are many. Each of us thinks his is the original. Each of us is wrong. There is no original. There is only the schedule." He said, "Every so often, the accounts get balanced. Two versions get too close to each other. They start to bleed. Signs appear where they were not. Dreams cross over. Phones ring in the night. When it happens, the schedule requires that one version give way to the other. One of us keeps this life. One of us goes." He said, "I have been on this porch waiting for you for 18 years since I finished my time here. It has been peaceful. Ada is a good woman. The bread is good. The rocking chair is worn to the shape of my back. I do not want to leave." He said, "But that is not up to me. It is up to us. The schedule has brought us to the same porch. Only one of us is going down the road again." Vernon said, "Down which road?" The man said, "Not the road you came in on. That road only runs one way. It brought you here. It will not take you back. There is another road out of this place. It runs east from the back of the house. It does not have a sign. It goes somewhere else, somewhere neither of us has been." He said, "One of us walks that road. The other stays." He said, "I am tired, Vernon. I have been tired a long time. I do not want to walk that road. I want to stay. I want you to walk it." He said, "But we do not get to choose. Ada chooses." Vernon said, "Ada?" The man said, "Yes. She is the constant. She is the same in both versions, or as close as makes no difference. She is the anchor. She will look at us both, and she will choose which of us is her Vernon. The other of us will walk the road." He said, "She is finishing the bread. She will come out on the porch in about 5 minutes. When she comes, we will both stand up. We will not speak. She will look at us. She will choose." Vernon sat in the chair. He thought about running. He thought about it hard. He could get in his truck. He could drive back down Farm Road 716. He could get to 287. He could go home. But he knew sitting there that if he ran, the man on the porch would go home to Amarillo, to his Ada, to his life, because the accounts had to be balanced. One version had to give. He stayed in the chair. The screen door opened. Ada came out. She was Ada, his Ada, in her yellow apron, flour on her hands, her hair pulled back, the freckle on her right ear, the little scar on her chin. She stopped on the porch. She looked at Vernon. She looked at the man in the other chair. She looked at Vernon again. She said, "Oh." She said, "Oh, no." She said, "'Tis time." Vernon stood up. The other man stood up. They stood on either side of the porch. Ada stood between them. She looked at Vernon a long time. She looked at the other man a long time. She did not seem to be able to tell them apart. She said in a small voice, "I don't know." The other man said, "Ada, take your time." She looked at Vernon. She said, "When we got married, what did you say to me? The first thing, when the preacher said, 'Kiss the bride,' what did you say to me?" Vernon said, "I said, I hope you like burnt toast because that is what I know how to make." Ada smiled. "Just a little." She looked at the other man. She said, "What did you say?" The other man said, "I said, I hope you like burnt toast because that is what I know how to make Ada said, "Oh," she said, "both of you have the memory." The other man said, "Yes, we are both him, up to a point." Ada looked at Vernon a long time. She said quietly, "Which one of you got the phone call?" Vernon said, "I did, last night." The other man said, "I have been getting them for 18 years. Every night at 3. I answer. I say what I said to him last night. That is my job here. I answer the phone. Ada looked at the other man. She said, "Every night for 18 years. The other man said, "Yes." She said, "I have never heard the phone ring, not once." The other man said, "That is because it does not ring in this house. It rings in the other house, in the copy, where Vernon lives, where you also live, or where a version of you lives, but you have not been that Ada in 18 years. You have been this Ada, this one on this porch, that other Ada in that other house. She has been alone, and she has been dreaming, and now the dreams are catching up." Ada said, "Vernon, my Vernon, is that one still there, in Amarillo, right now?" Vernon said, "She is asleep in our bed. She is not the other Ada. She is my Ada, my wife." Ada, the one on the porch, said, "She is me." She said, "She is me, and I am her, and we have been split for 18 years. She has been living my life. I have been living hers. I do not remember which of us is the copy. Neither does she. I do not think there is a copy. I think there are only 2 of us now, both real, both worn in on our own porches." She looked at Vernon. She said, "I choose you." The other man in the rocking chair did not move. She said, "I am sorry. I do not know why. There is nothing between the 2 of you I can see. But I choose you. I want you to stay." The other man closed his eyes. He said, "Thank you, Ada." He said, "I have been so tired." He stood up. He set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. He walked down the porch steps. He walked around the side of the house. Vernon and Ada stood on the porch. Vernon could hear the other man's footsteps on the grass, going around to the back of the house. Then he could hear them fading on a road he could not see from the porch, a road that went east from the back of the house. Somewhere he had never been, somewhere he did not want to know about. The footsteps faded, then they were gone. Ada took Vernon's hand. She said, "Come inside. The bread is ready." They went inside. Now, here is what Vernon told me at the truck stop in Oklahoma a year later. He said, "I went inside. I ate bread with her. The bread was good. She was Ada, every detail. She was my wife." He said, "But something was wrong." He said, "She was Ada, but she was not my Ada. She was a version of Ada who had been waiting on that porch for 18 years. She knew things my Ada did not know. She did not know things my Ada did know. She called me by pet names my Ada did not use. She did not know the names of our neighbors on our street in Amarillo." He said, "I stayed a week. I could not leave. Farm Road 716 only runs one way. That is what the man on the porch said, and it was true. The road that had brought me in was gone. I checked. I walked out to the front. The road ended at the porch. It did not go any further." He said, "After a week, I understood." He said, "I was not going back to Amarillo. There was no back to Amarillo. There was only this house, this porch, this Ada, forever." He said, "I understood that the man on the porch had been me, not a copy. Me, a me who had come here 18 years ago from somewhere else, from another Amarillo, from another life. He had lived here 18 years. He had gotten tired. He had waited for the next me to come, and when I came, He had walked down the road at the back of the house, to somewhere else, to another version, to start over. He said, I understood that I would live in this house until I was tired. Then I would sit on the porch, and I would answer the phone at 3 in the morning, and I would call the next Vernon Boaz, and I would tell him to come home, and when he came, I would meet him on the porch, and I would drink coffee with him, and Ada would choose me to leave, because that is what tired men are chosen for. And I would walk down the road at the back of the house, and I would go somewhere else, he said. And then he saw a strange thing. He said one morning on the porch, I looked at the sign at the top of Farm Road 716. I could see it, faint in the distance, a green sign. It said something, I could just barely read it. He said it said, Farm Road 716, Boaz Residence, 2 miles. He said, but the arrow was pointing away from the house, away into the flat land. He said, I understood that a new road was being built, that somewhere out there a new house was appearing, a new version of my house, and in it a new Vernon Boaz was moving in, and in a few years, or a few decades, or a few centuries, the accounts would balance again, and I would be the man on the porch, and a new Vernon would come, and Ada would choose. He said, I don't know how long I have been here. I do not know how long I have been away. Time does not run right on this porch. I said, Vernon, you are here now, in Oklahoma. You are drinking coffee with me. This is real. He said, is it? He said, I do not know. I have been off the porch, I think, 3 times. Each time I have gone somewhere. Each time I have found a stranger. Each time I have told the story. Each time I have gone back. He said, you are my third. He said, I do not know what happens after the third. I do not know if I go back. I do not know if I stay. I said, Vernon, come with me. Get in my car, drive with me. Do not go back to your truck. He said, no, I have to go back. Ada is waiting. He said, she is always waiting. On the porch, she is a good woman. The bread is good. He stood up. He paid for his coffee. He walked out of the truck stop. He got in his truck. He drove east. I never saw him again. 2 years later, I read in a paper that a truck driver named Vernon Boaz had died of a heart attack at the wheel on a flat road in New Mexico. The truck had drifted off the road and come to a slow stop in the sand. He had been found still sitting upright, hands on the wheel, eyes open. There had been no expression on his face, just calm, as if he had been waiting for something for a long time, and it had finally come, and it had been all right. I have thought about Vernon many times since. I have looked at maps of the Texas Panhandle. There is no Farm Road 716. There has never been. I have checked with the highway department. I have checked with the county. I have checked with old-timers in Stratford who remember every road that was ever built out there. Nothing. But sometimes, friend, when I drive at night, I see signs I do not remember. Greene County signs, standard highway department issue, with names on them I do not know. Arrows pointing to places I have never been. I do not turn. I do not turn. I do not turn. The fire's down to embers now, friend. The rain's easing off. If you're still awake with me, close your eyes a while and let the last of these stories settle where they need to settle. If you drifted off somewhere along the way, well, I hope the dreams have been kind. I'll be right here tomorrow night. Same chair, same rain on the roof, same slow fire. Come on back, and we'll tell some more. Sleep easy now, friend. Sleep easy.